turn your cameras on.
It's processing right now. I'll let you know when it goes live.
Jamie, is it the same link?
Yes. You're live.
House will please come back to order. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to continue with our second reading. Chief Clerk, any business we need to do before we proceed?
No, sir.
All right, thank you. So members, I just want a recap of this morning. We had 3 hours of floor work on second reading, 9 bills, of which there were 5 amendments, and 108 times we spoke, which means we're doing our work, which means we're discussing and debating issues on behalf of the state of Wyoming. So let's keep up that good work. We'll continue with this work, and then we'll go on to committee of the whole. The next bill for consideration on second reading is House Bill 45.
House Bill 45, sponsored by Select Water. Changes to water right, notice requirements for hearing, an act relating to water.
Thank you, Chief Clerk. There is an amendment. However, the sponsor of that amendment is excused for a period this afternoon and not able to present it. So I am withdrawing that amendment on his behalf, and House Bill 45 have been read 2 separate times. The question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. The next bill for our consideration is House Bill 48.
House Bill 48, sponsored by Appropriations, Community Juvenile Services Block Grant Program, an act relating to community juvenile services.
House Bill 48, I don't believe has any amendments. Nope. House Bill 48 having been read 2 separate times. The question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, is so ordered. Next bill for our consideration is House Bill 66.
House Bill 66, sponsored by Natural Resource Funding, 2021 Large Project Funding, an act relating to the Wyoming Wildlife and Natural Resource Funding Act.
House Bill 66 having having read 2 separate times. The question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, is so ordered. Next bill for our consideration is House Joint Resolution 1.
House Joint Resolution 1, sponsored by Transportation, Highways, and Military Affairs. Traumatic brain injury and post-traumatic stress treatments. A joint resolution requesting Congress to enact legislation and requesting that the Veterans Administration work to expand and improve efforts to treat traumatic brain injuries and post-traumatic stress disorder.
Thank you. Members, we have 2 second reading amendments to this bill. The first one is Representative Rodriguez-Williams.
Mr. Chairman, I move the adoption of second reading Amendment 1 to House Joint Resolution 1 and ask for your favorable consideration.
Please proceed.
On page 1, line 1, delete the word commit and insert die by, and I'd be happy to explain.
Please do so.
In the suicide prevention field, the word and term committed suicide is discouraged. The verb commit, when followed by an act, is generally used for actions that many people view as immoral. So people commit burglary, murder, rape, and other crimes. While suicide is bad, the act is often always the product of mental illness, intolerable stress, or unbearable trauma. I believe using proper terminology when talking about suicide can help the stigma of talking about it and nonetheless understand those that are experiencing suicidal ideation rather than condemning their thoughts.
Thank you very much, Representative Williams. Anyone for their first time? Representative Larson Dan.
Mr. Chairman, thank you, or Mr. Speaker. I think this is a great amendment, and I appreciate the good bringer for bringing this bill or amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else for their first time? Representative Nyman for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I too would like to raise my hand in support of this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other member for their first time? Representative Bear.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in support of the amendment.
Thank you. We had a little bit of difficulty hearing you, Representative Bear. I know you spoke in support, but there was a little bit of a muffling to your microphone. Representative Burt, for your first time.
Yes, sir, Mr. Speaker. I also would like to, I'm also in favor of this amendment as well.
I like how the freshman class is sticking together. Representative Romero Martinez.
I want to speak in support of this amendment. I think it uses clear and crisp terminology. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Anyone else for their first time? Anyone else for their first time? Representative Haraldson. Representative Haraldson, you're still muted. There you go.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman, yes. I will too speak towards this and very glad that we are paying attention to this type of nomenclature, because for people that have walked this road, that is especially for families that have had this road walked, to have the rights, nomenclature is going to mean a lot. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Anyone for their first time? Anyone else for their first time? Anyone for their first time? Anyone for their second time? Anyone for their second time before the sponsor? Representative Williams, would like to add any further comment?
Mr. Speaker, no.
Thank you. So members, we're voting on second reading amendment number 1 to House Joint Resolution number 1. All those in favor, please raise your hands to your screen. Thank you. All those opposed? Thank you. The amendment has been adopted. We're now on second reading amendment number 2 to House Joint Resolution number 1. Representative Yin.
Mr. Speaker, he's excused at the moment.
Representative, so I have Representative Baker or Olson on the amendment as well. Either of those two gentlemen want to present the amendment? Representative Baker, please proceed.
Mr. Speaker, thank you for that. I would move second reading amendment number 1 to House Joint Resolution 1 and ask for your favorable consideration.
Just as clarification, this is number 2, second reading number 2 to House Joint 1. Thank you.
Correct, Mr. Speaker. Second reading amendment number 2 to House Joint Resolution 1.
Thank you. Please proceed.
Mr. Speaker, I think we'll have adequate time to discuss this on bills in the future, and I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on this, but I do think that it is relevant because I think that there is research that is available that shows that medical cannabis is a relevant medical use, and there are medical uses for it. I think that there is also, I think nationally, there are organizations for veterans that do and have come out in support of this as an alternative. It doesn't, nothing in this amendment alleviates anything that's being said or currently offered. It's just additional language. So I would offer it as something that would improve the bill and the resolution. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and ask for your favorable consideration.
Thank you, Representative Baker. Anyone want to visit for the first time on this amendment? I've got Representative Larson Dan, and then it'll be Representative, I got a lot of people coming up on the screen. My screen's shifting all the time. So go with Larson Dan first, and then Haraldson. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. I would hope the body would resist this amendment. We all know that this isn't current law for Wyoming, and I don't think we should encourage it. Thank you.
Representative Haraldson, and then Burt, and then Heiner.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I believe this is a dangerous slope, and I'm going to at least speak for the people of House District number 4 that very overwhelming desire that we do not allow this to enter into our state. I feel that it's something that if we allow that, even in this way, it could get out of hand. With that being said, I will say this. I mean, I'm not detracting at all from our veterans or what they've gone through. And I believe that we should do everything in our power to help them. But I believe that we could hurt this state much more by doing this than actually helping it. So I stand in opposition to this amendment and believe that if we were to pass this, we will step into an area that we are not willing to go, nor are we able to go.
Thank you, Representative Burt, and then Heiner, and then Yin. Representative Burt.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I do stand in favor of this amendment as a representative from fellow Sweetwater County had mentioned. It does not change. It does add a level of therapy to veterans with mental health issues. There are studies out there. This doesn't change Wyoming law. This is our statement to the federal level to again talk to the VA and look into and at least consider an additional therapies to help with both the TBI and PTSD side of veterans injuries. So I do stand in favor of this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Heiner, for your first time.
Thank you, Speaker. I stand in opposition to this amendment. I believe that this clouds an otherwise good legislation with a topic that needs to be vetted on its own. Medical marijuana needs clear and concise boundaries so it does not lead into recreational use. And I don't think this legislation is the point where we want to debate that. I think it would need to be brought up in legislation to stand on its own and not be encumbered upon this piece of legislation. And so I stand in opposition to this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Representative Yin, and then Nyman.
Mr. Speaker, I want to apologize, first of all, to the body. It is not usually my place to be late. And so given that, I'll start with that apology. I will say that this amendment, I don't think it's one that I took lightly, but it is one where I think the discussion was very much warranted. If we want to find as many treatments as possible for helping our veterans with PTSD and TBI, for me, I think a lot of that discussion does need to happen on the federal level. And so I brought forth this amendment with my co-sponsors to figure out if we can get the federal government to have this conversation as well. So I do ask for your favorable consideration, and I am on and for this amendment. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Representative Nyman, first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yeah, I too want to speak against this amendment. I fully support and I appreciate the joint resolution and want to keep all of my support behind that. But I too want to echo the concerns of several of the legislators that I don't think this is the place to do this. I think that there's going to need to be discussion separate from this, and I don't want to create that kind of a problem right now with what we're dealing with. And I think we need to go ahead and forward the legislation the way it was originally written, minus the amendment. So I stand against the amendment. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Representative Hallinan, and then Chairman Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think this is inappropriate to pass this amendment in view of the fact that we haven't legalized marijuana in this state. I think we're dealing with this prematurely here, and it really extends the debate in an unnecessary manner in regards to this bill. So for that reason, Mr. Speaker, I'm against this amendment.
Thank you. Chairman Wilson, first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On and opposed to the amendment. I've done a fair amount of research on this through labor committee issues and as a former healthcare administrator. And I think just from a political side that I would hate to see an otherwise good resolution go down for because of putting in something like this that would be so inadequately supported. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much. Chairman Olson, for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As a sponsor of the amendment for the amendment, I don't know that we can jump to conclusions that A, this is inadequately supported, or B, that it's premature, or C, that it's ill-placed. I think one, whether it's supported or not will depend on the vote. So we'll know that when we do vote. I don't want to belabor the work of the body today, because I think you'll have ample opportunity to engage in a full and frank discussion on cannabis at some point throughout the session, if not at some point in some session. But I think the bringer of the amendment has properly placed this for a couple of reasons. One, because it sticks to the original purpose of the resolution, which I will remind the body is a resolution. We're not passing a law. So whether or not Wyoming law says one thing or another is entirely irrelevant to a resolution to the federal government. It's an opinion piece, if nothing else. But what hasn't been touched on is the fiscal aspect of it. And I can't recall if this testimony was let in when the resolution was produced, but hyperbaric oxygen therapy is extremely expensive, very expensive. So as a fiscal conservative, I couldn't, in all honesty, support this resolution, knowing that there is an alternative that is very cheap or inexpensive compared to hyperbaric oxygen. So I think that it's from a fiscal standpoint, it's prudent for us to consider alternatives that are both natural and fiscally responsible. And I think that's what the author of this amendment is really trying to put in front of you, is that there's an alternative. So it's not exclusive. And so I think that's a consideration that this body should think about. It's one thing to say we want to encourage this treatment. It's another thing when we haven't even discussed the cost of hyperbaric oxygen therapy, and we're all going to say, yep, that's what we support, but we don't know how much it costs. So maybe that's a conversation we should have. Mr. Speaker, thank you.
Thank you. I have Representative Stivar and then Representative Fortner for their first times. Representative Stivar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On and against this amendment, this is not the proper time and place to be discussing American marijuana. Needs to come out in a separate legislation. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Fortner for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm against the amendment, but I do believe with the states surrounding us, it's got marijuana laws in place. I believe we better be ready for that conversation. I think it's coming quick. Thank you.
Thank you. I have Representative Romero Martinez and then Representative Worf. Representative Martinez.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I do believe that it has a proper place. I do believe that it is relevant, and it has been relevant for the last 20 years, but it's not relevant right here. So I'm going to not support this one at this time, but I would like to encourage the conversation. But I do want to also input, it's been discussed in previous legislatures. CBD is also something that we just need to take our time. Let's not put too much in a bill. This is a good bill the way it is. Let's attack or approach, if you will, cannabis as a whole separately. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Representative Worf for your first time.
Yeah, Mr. Speaker, this is difficult for me. I know while I was going around knocking on doors, I actually had a constituent that came to me having just quite literally the day before having lost her mother to cancer. And her husband and her son actually shared with me the situation they were in, where her mother was at the last stages of her life trying to find some kind of relief. and they actually were in a different state. They weren't here in Wyoming, but they actually went and found some medical marijuana that they illegally obtained, snuck it into the hospital to give their mom relief before she died. And I thought nobody should be put in a situation where they are being forced to break the law to help a loved one. And this is a situation where it's difficult. I have concerns about the adage, you give an inch, they'll take a mile. I'm concerned about cannabis use in general, but I will say that I have seen beneficial use from medical marijuana in my family. I have a son that's had similar issues, and that's been the only thing that's really helped him. So I am probably going to break with some of my friends today, and I am going to support this. I do agree with the representative that actually hails from my hometown, even though he now lives in the capital city. I'm going to stand with him because I do share the view that this is a joint resolution. I don't see it having any impact on our law. I think it's a discussion that we need to have, and I think it's a discussion that we will have. So I would urge support for this amendment, just because I do think that it should be something afforded for those people that would like to have this kind of relief available for them. So, Mr. Chairman, I'll end my testimony with that. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Representative Wharf. Representative Ottman, for your first time on the amendment to House Joint Resolution 1.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm really enjoying all of the conversation. It's amazing what can come up from a joint resolution. What I was wondering was if the good representative would be able to give me some ideas about how expensive hyperbaric oxygen therapies might be. I'm sure he's looked into it. And also, from what I read from the resolution, it is for therapies. Do we have actual therapy procedures for medical marijuana in place in the state? Because from what I read, this is for, I mean, that could be added later or whatever, but this is mentions things that are already in place that these veterans, we could say, well, we support this. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other members for their first time on second reading amendment number 2 to House Joint Resolution number 1? Any other members for their first time?
Mr. Speaker, Representative O'Hearn.
Yes, please, Representative O'Hearn, please proceed.
I'm looking up hyperbaric oxygen therapy chambers. They're $4,900. Our VA center in Sheridan doesn't have one, but they believe that most major hospitals do. So that would be Billings, Casper. I didn't check with Casper, but it's $4,900, and I oppose this amendment.
Thank you, Representative O'Hearn. Chairman Burkhart.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On and against the amendment, I think this amendment dilutes from the power of the joint resolution. The resolution was worked well during the interim, worked well even after the interim. And I think that to add another therapy in here is probably not appropriate to the joint resolution. There are additional therapies that could be added in here. Any number of things that can be looked at. I think the correct term is trepanning, where a hole is drilled in a person's skull to let air in. We could include that, and any number of them. I think that we should stay targeted on the joint resolution and reject the amendment. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much. Any other member for their first time? Any other member on the amendment for the first time? Seeing none, any member for a second time? Any member for a second time? Representative Hallinan, please proceed.
Mr. Speaker, I am a co-sponsor in a bill that's going to be going before the legislature to study the effect of medical marijuana and to see whether we should approve it for the state. So I just don't think it's appropriate that we would be discussing this issue now in reference to this bill. And for that reason, Mr. Speaker, I oppose this amendment. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Representative Hallinan. Representative Baker. Actually, I want to make sure there's no one else because Representative Baker started this. So he's actually presented it. So I want to make sure there's no one else for their second time. Second time. I'm going to start with Representative.
Okay.
Yep, I'm going to start with Representative Wharf and then Yin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll try to be brief. I guess I'm not so much married with having to say medical marijuana. I guess we could always bring another amendment that just says other therapies as approved. But I do think it's important that we don't close the door. I do believe that it has some benefit, just from, like I said, personal experience with my family. And so I guess I agree to a certain point that we got to be cautious how we move forward with this. But I look at this is a resolution we're sending to Congress. The reality is, whether we specify medical marijuana or we say other available or other approved therapies, it's really our recommendation to Congress. So I'm not really concerned either way. But I think that's another viable option if somebody is concerned that much about medical marijuana, that they just come back and say other approved therapies and leave it at that. That opens the door to any approved therapies. And that might be a better resolution in the long run. So that's just an idea, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Representative Yin, for your second time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, I just want to focus us a little bit. So this resolution is not about what we do in Wyoming. It's about what the federal government does when it helps treat their veterans. And so when we're talking about treatment options, this resolution is about expanding the types of treatments available to veterans. And I think it is prudent when we talk about treatments for PTSD to include medical marijuana. And I don't think that's necessarily precluding the oxygen therapy either. And that's why the amendment just adds it. So I do think it's an option that we should have the federal government discuss. And I do hope you will vote in favor of the amendment. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much. I'm going to go with Representative Olson and then Nyman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wanted to close with some thoughts, but before I do that, I wanted to address just a little deeper the question of the expense. It's a lot more complicated than that, but I think the last speaker really summed it up that, it doesn't matter what you have in a hospital here in Wyoming or not. That's really not the question. But to the cost, I don't remember the exact dollar figure that was quoted, but that's in the $4,000 range is a quote for basically a personal hyperbaric chamber in your home. If you were purchasing one of these in a large facility, a large chamber would probably be more like $15,000, $17,000, $20,000. That's just the chamber. It's not the expense that we're talking about. The expense is the use of the chamber, the session to use the chamber. So how often is the chamber used? Hundreds of sessions will be used, not once or twice, but hundreds. Each session costing individually in the hundreds, and that could range depending on the size, the location, etc. But it's going to be anywhere from $150, $200, $300, $400 per session. So we're talking about tens of thousands of dollars for an individual using it. So it is a very costly process. Compare that to, and I think it goes without saying, I think most people understand the cost of cannabis and medical cannabis as compared to that. That probably goes without much debate. So I just wanted to clarify that financial question that was asked. And then, Mr. Speaker, I want to close by saying that I really support this resolution. It means a lot to me. no matter what happens, this amendment passes or not, I'll go to the ends of the earth to help make sure this resolution goes forward. And I don't think this dilutes it. I don't think it hurts it. It changes the perception and it changes the message, but it doesn't. If someone were to vote against this because of that, that would sadden my heart. I would be surprised that would cause someone to vote against our veterans. And so I think it's the reverse, Mr. Speaker. I would say that we should not take any options off the table when we're talking about supporting our veterans. We should have all options on the table, and that's why I support this amendment. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Representative Nyman, I just want to confirm, did you want to speak? Yes, please proceed. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I guess in opposition to what was just relayed, I think that is probably the biggest issue in this amendment to me, is that this is not legal right now in our state. And what I've, in my very short tenure of being involved in the legislature here, my understanding of the House Joint Resolution is to send our desires and our wants to the national scene to reflect what we believe and what we see and support here in the state of Wyoming. And so I guess my understanding of that would be that we would want to put in something that we already support and have legalized here. But I think we're putting a little bit in the context of this. I think the cart is getting out ahead of the horse here. I think we need to not mess with this legislation. This is good. This supports our veterans. This is not the format or the time to do this. But I mean, I can see where it would be valuable if that was a long-term plan to do that, is to send that Wyoming supports this, but without legislative action as far as the people saying that that's what they want and they support that to our national delegation and want to promote that nationwide. I think we better take care of that on a separate issue and not try to attach it to this and to try to send a message right now before the folks have had an opportunity to voice their opinions on this and vote on our support of medical marijuana in the state of Wyoming before we push this. So I stand against this amendment and would like to keep it clean and definitely support the resolution and want to be able to support it. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much. I have Representative Burt and then Representative Fortner in that order. Representative Burt.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll try to keep it fairly short. I am still in support of this amendment. We often hear the argument that it's marijuana or medical marijuana is illegal at the federal level, and until we put enough pressure at the federal level to show support for the benefits of this, we're not going to get any movement at that level. I myself, having been to Iraq and some of the events that over there, I actually live with a 50% VA rating of PTSD. So I've looked into this. However, with my current job, this is not something that I cannot actually look into as a form of therapy. However, understanding the PTSD personally and how it can affect somebody's life on a day-to-day aspect, whether it's a home life, family life, or being able to actually go to work, it can be a very crippling effect on us personally for those of us that live with it. And this isn't just on the military side of it. PTSD can be something that comes from a dog attack or a car accident or anything like that. But where this is strictly on the military side of life, I can see it personally from on the combat role and stuff like that, the effects of as many therapies that are out there, that we can remove the possibility of overprescription of drugs and medications that can hide the effect, and on the surface it can look like it's treating the PTSD or that level of it, but it could just be hiding the overall the disease of it, including other therapies such as the hyperbaric treatment, as well as a possibility of the medical marijuana side of it. It can pull a lot of the opioid addictions that we're seeing a lot of our veterans getting on because of the fact that they're fighting this with basic medications. So I understand that it's a new thought process within the medical marijuana world and stuff like that. And just because it's not legal here in the state, we're not trying to change the law. We're trying to open up the discussion at the federal level, and having to deal with the VA personally. The VA will do a study before it even goes forth and pushes out this type of a therapy. And it's not just medical marijuana, but any type of new drug or new therapy or anything like that. So before the VA gets to the point where it prescribes that or gets to that treatment, it's going to do its due diligence and it's going to study it in itself. And if VA doesn't feel that, the medical marijuana therapy is beneficial, it's not going to push it that way. But with the money and the resources that organization has, it'll be able to do studies and to find out if it is a viable option for a lot of our combat veterans and stuff like that. So a little bit on my personal side of things and why I do support this. I think I appreciate all the discussion back and forth on the fors and the against and the merits and everybody's personal opinions. And it does mean a lot that we can have the discussion, but I want to say that, the resolution itself does ask for different therapies and different treatments and stuff like that. And that's just kind of where I want to go with it also. I'll end, but I do, again, support this amendment.
Thank you very much. Representative Fortner and then Representative Romero Martinez.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Vince, we're live on YouTube. I just want everybody to know that whether we vote for this resolution or we vote against this resolution, we're all here for our Navy vets, and this has nothing to do whether we like it or we don't like it. This is a situation here in the House. I just don't want anybody to think that just because we vote this down, we're not for the vets. Thank you.
I think we should probably extend that to all of our veterans, not just those naval guys. Come on now. All right. Thank you. Representative Romero Martinez. Representative Martinez, I'm going to have to have you turn your mic on, please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I'm going to call an audible here. I thought it was malplaced, but after listening to the bringers of the bill, I'm going to support this amendment because we're making a request from the federal government, and after having some in-depth conversations over the last 15 years with our elected federal representatives, my understanding is that they're already a unanimous vote on they've had unanimous vote on medical marijuana for quite some time, but there have been some chairmen that have kept it in their drawer. So if this is the way we make a request, then I'm going to go ahead and go with it. And I'm going to say to support this amendment in an audible, changing my previous stance. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much. I have Representative Heiner and then Representative Stivar. Representative Heiner, please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I stand opposed to this amendment. It's only been 3 weeks ago that I stood in the chamber there and took my oath of office to uphold the laws of the state of Wyoming. The state of Wyoming has not legalized medical marijuana at this point. And for us to pass a resolution otherwise to the federal government to do something that's not legal in Wyoming, I think it goes against my standards here. We need to have this conversation in a separate bill about medical marijuana where we can put boundaries upon it so it doesn't spill over into recreational use. I am not opposed to medical marijuana, but I don't think that this legislation should be the point where we have this debate. I would think that we should do that with a different bill that deals specifically with the pros and cons of medical marijuana. But again, as a legislator, I took an oath of office to uphold the laws of the state, and those laws are not yet does not legalize medical marijuana. And so to pass a resolution otherwise, I think is contrary to what we stand for. Again, I stand in opposition to this. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Still oppose this amendment. And I just wanted to remind you, the Marines are part of the Department of the Navy.
You are muted, sir.
Well, there's a good reason I was muted. I'm a Marine.
Department of the Navy.
But I do appreciate that reminder, and I'm sure our colleague, Representative Blackburn, will appreciate that reminder as well. Good sailor. Any other member for their first time? Any other member for their first time? Or second time, excuse me. Any other member for their second time? My apologies. To the maker of the motion, Representative Baker, please bring it home.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Again, it wasn't the intention of any of the sponsors of this amendment to bring harm to the bill or to draw attention or to do any disservice to the discussion that was had prior. But I do want to just wrap a couple things up quickly. And I do appreciate the discussion. As others have said, it's nice to be able to have the discussion, and we appreciate that. Part of the reason, and I don't think that it's a valid point to say that because Wyoming hasn't done anything that we medically that we shouldn't have this discussion, because part of the reason I think Wyoming hasn't moved on this issue is because the federal government hasn't moved on this issue. So I do think that this is valid and relevant. I think that nationally the discussion is happening, whether we like it or not. The tide has turned nationally, and the discussion will continue to happen. I also believe that there are, as far as the relevance to this bill, as I said in the beginning, there are organizations, veteran organizations, national veteran organizations that have come out in support of similar language to this amendment. And so I would just ask you to vote your conscience. And again, thank you for your indulgence, and thank you, body. I appreciate the discussion, and I look forward to future discussions. Please vote your conscience and support the bill, support the amendment. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Members, we are voting on second reading amendment number 2 to House Joint Resolution number 1. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Thank you. All those opposed? The amendment has failed. House Joint Resolution 1, having been read 2 separate times, the question is, shall the joint resolution be read a third time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. All right, well done, members. We've completed our second reading of the bills that we did on Committee of the Whole yesterday. So tomorrow we'll have the same order of business on third reading. And so if you have amendments that you would like to put forth for third reading, please have those prepared for us in a timely manner. I think, Chief Clerk, is there any committee announcements or any messages we need to take care of right now?
No, sir.
All right. Mr. Majority Floor Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the House resolve itself into Committee of the Whole. And Mr. Speaker, I'm going to give the body kind of the rundown of the bills that'll be on Committee of the Whole. I sent them out a list, I think, earlier. The last one will drop off, but the bills will be in the following order: 35, 4, 25, 53, 15, 18, 29, and 62.
Thank you. So, Mr. Majority Floor Leader, I have 35, 4, 25, 53, 15, 18, 29, and 62.
That is correct, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. You've heard the Majority Floor Leader's motion. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Thank you. All those opposed? Thank you. And it's traditional when we're on the floor, I'll just say this to members before I call on the Committee of the Whole Chairman today, that when there's a lot of encouragement when a chairman comes to the Committee of the Whole. And so the people on the floor can certainly clap and hoorah, and the members on the screen can wave their hands and do whatever they like. Now, Speaker Pro Tem Greer.
All right, committee of the whole will come to order. Thank you. The committee of the whole will come to order. I'm going to do my best here working off the screen with this many people. Representative Flitner, could you be a second set of eyes for me if I miss somebody's hand that's up? I see we have a few people don't have the hand function, and if you could help me out, just give me a holler. I'm used to you yelling at me, so it should work fine. So,
Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to do that.
all right, thank you. Okay, the first bill for our consideration is House Bill number 35. The reading clerk will read the bill.
House Bill 35, sponsored by Judiciary. Theft Status Amendment, an act relating to crimes and offenses. This bill was referred to Committee Number 1, Judiciary, which returned a recommendation that it do pass with the following amendments. Ayes, Representative Crago, Larson, Dan, Oakley, Olson, Provenza, Williams, Washit, Yin, Zwanitzer. Signed, Representative Olson, Chairman.
You've heard the reading of the bill. What is your pleasure? Chairman Olson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My pleasure is that I move that when the committee of the whole rises to report it, do so with the recommendation that bill number 35 do pass. And with that, I will turn over the explanation of this bill to one of our newer members from the county, right over the hill from where I reside, in that place that is a Laradice and home to the university that we also love.
Can you give me a little better hint, Mr. Chairman, of who that might be?
I don't know the numbers, Mr. Chairman, but that would be Representative Provenza.
Representative Provenza. Okay, thank you. Mr. Chairman, there is an amendment. Is that a standing committee amendment?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. The bill itself is very straightforward. I guess I think that there may be more debate on the amendment than on the bill itself. So maybe we'll do the bill explanation and then come back to me and I'll dispose of the standing committee amendment.
All right, whatever works for you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. Representative Provenza.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I bring to you House Bill 35 and ask for your favorable consideration. I will explain the bill at this time. Esteemed members of the 65th legislature, you may recall that last year the legislature consolidated our theft statutes. During the 65th legislature's consolidation of the theft statutes, the penultimate qualifier of or at the end of the second element of theft was omitted, which meant that to prove that someone committed theft, they had to have committed all three elements of theft. Currently, under Title 6, Chapter 3, Section 402, there are three elements to the crime of theft. When you look at the bill, the hefty bill of House Bill 35, you'll see that it is primarily a cleanup bill. Going into the bill specifically, on page 1, lines 11 through line 2 of page 2 provides the definition of theft as it exists in subsection A. On page 2, lines 4 through 6 is the second paragraph or element of the theft statute. That penultimate qualifier of or has been added to the end of this paragraph, which would clarify the elements of the crime of theft. And then lines 8 through 11 provide an effective date of the completion of the bill to become law. So just in summary, given that this is such a lengthy bill to look at, we are just asking to add or to the second element of the crime, theft, so that one does not have to prove all 3 elements of theft to be found guilty. And for that, I will stand for any questions.
Okay, members, any questions from the explanation of the bill? Okay, I'm not seeing any. Very straightforward. Do we got to Chairman? Well, let me go first with Representative Harrelson. You have a question on the bill?
Maybe more of a statement. I actually, sorry, do I refer to you as Chairman?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman's proper.
Okay, Mr.
Yes.
Chairman, thank you. So honestly, this kind of actually in some way was birthed out of House District 4. I was, one Sunday morning, we had a vehicle blazing across a pasture in front of my house that had been stolen from oil country up north and brought down the interstate. And it ended up that this individual could not be charged because they didn't try sell the vehicle. And so this kind of came forward. So thank you. And I'm glad that we're able to clean this up.
Okay, thank you for the comments. Okay, we want to dispense with the amendment. Mr. Chairman, Chairman Olson.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will. And yeah, so I think I really like the comments from the last speaker. This is really a cleanup. It's a scrivener's error that occurred by the legislature. As we all know, we don't make mistakes. So we're just cleaning that up. The standing committee amendment, I do move standing committee amendment number 1. Well, I move that when the committee of the whole rises report, do so with the recommendation that this bill pass, and I'm moving the standing committee number 1 to it. This amendment, I expect some conversation that you're gonna, members, have take place between various legal theories of the body. So brace yourself. But what this amendment does is delete the word knowingly on page 2, line 4, which is the beginning of Romanet 2. So the way this statute works, to back it up just a little bit, is that you have on page 1, paragraph A, a statement that tells us that a person is guilty of theft if he knowingly, so that's the mens rea, the mental intent, the intent that the person must have, takes, obtains, procures, and the list goes on. And if you go over to page 2, and line 2 does one of the 3 things, and your bill only shows you one of those 3 things, which is Romanet 2. Romanets 1 and 3 aren't being changed in the statute, so you don't see them. But in sum, the way this statute works is you're guilty of theft if you do what is in paragraph A, you do that knowingly, plus you do one of the 3, or you could do all the 3, but you only have to do one of the 3 Romanets. So the one in front of you would be knowingly uses, receives, conceals, abandons, or disposes of the property. And I think there's a lot of different ways to look at this. I think you'll probably hear from, we've got 2 prosecutors on our committee, and so they could speak to this a lot better than I can or will. But from my perspective, as a legal beagle, as I read this statute, what I think it does, if you leave the word knowingly in, is it pretty much makes it impossible to prove theft, which is the opposite of what we were trying to do with this cleanup bill. Because as written without the or, you had to prove all of these elements. And that made it pretty impossible to do as well. So by putting the or, all you're really having to prove is that somebody, for example, knowingly takes something and then uses or receives it. If you leave knowingly in, what you're asking the prosecutor to do is prove that somebody knowingly took and obtained something, and then they also knowingly used, receives, or whatever the property. Now that doesn't make any sense, because if you knowingly took something, you couldn't, how could you knowingly use it? You just use it. So what that would result in is an illogical reading of the statute, which the court can't do. So it wouldn't apply knowingly to the words uses, receives, conceals. Instead, it will apply knowingly to the second part of that sentence, which is on line 6 on page 2. So it reads, uses, receives, conceals, abandons, or disposes of the property in such a manner as to deprive the other person of its use or benefit. And that's what's key, because I believe the way the court would have to read this statute, one way that I think it would end up is proving that somebody first knowingly took something and then that they used it knowingly to deprive the other person of its use or benefit. And to me, that's the complicated part. If you take somebody's iPhone or someone's phone, excuse me, you take somebody's phone, you either do it knowingly or you don't. If you took it knowingly, meaning it didn't just fall into under the seat of your car, but you actually picked it up off the person's, off the console, you knowingly took it, you've met the first part of the statute. You can't knowingly use it. That's illogical. You either use the phone or you don't use the phone. If you use the phone, the question becomes, did the person did he use the phone knowing he was depriving the real owner of the phone of its use or benefit? So how would I prove that as a prosecutor is where I run into an issue when I read that, because I would have to prove that person A took a phone knowingly and then they used it. Okay, I prove that they use it. Then I prove that they knew that they were depriving you of your ability to use or benefit from your phone. So I would have to prove that I knew that you didn't have a landline phone, you didn't have another phone, and that's where I think it gets very complicated for a prosecutor. So the knowingly places an extra burden on this element that is completely unnecessary. You're not going to have a bad guy slip away. If he took the phone and he took it knowingly and he somehow used it, you've got him for theft. That's what you want. You don't want to have to prove anything beyond that. Simply the fact that he took the phone and he took it with knowledge that it was not his own is enough in the minds of a layman to say, oh, you stole something. You took something that wasn't yours and you knew that you did that. Why would we want you to have to prove, prosecutor, that the person also deprived the other person knowingly deprived them of their use or benefit? So, Mr. Chairman, I'm seeing a lot of hands go up, which is great. I think there's going to be a discussion on whether this additional mens rea is necessary. At the end of the day, I'm not wed to this amendment either way. It's the way it came out of the committee. I'll look forward to more of that discussion. The important part, though, is that whatever you do with this amendment, you clean up the bill. Otherwise, we've got some bigger issues. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Stiff.
Mr. Chairman, thank you so very much. I disagree with the representative from District 11. Wednesday is trash day at my house, okay? If we keep this standing committee amendment, if we adopt it, and if I go out at the end of trash day to get my trash tote and I bring it back into my yard, but because all the trash totes look the same, I grab my neighbor's by mistake, with the standing committee amendment, I will be guilty of theft, okay? And that's just wrong. Our goal here is not to make life easy for prosecutors. Our goal is to make sure we prosecute bad people and not prosecute innocent people. The current language in statute is modeled after Colorado's statute, okay? It's what our 6-3-402 is practically verbatim from Colorado. What the standing committee amendment does is it takes out the mental intent element that you know that it's somebody else's trash can, that you know that it's somebody else's iPhone. If you are in the cafeteria and you think you're picking up your iPhone, but you pick up somebody else's, we don't think of that as theft, okay? So I think it's important to keep in the knowingly in Romanet 2, and so I would urge you to vote against the standing committee amendment. Thank you.
Mr. Majority Floor Leader.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And this is just a quick note to the body. because we have a rules committee meeting after this. We will shut down at 5 o'clock on these bills. That is not to just stifle debate, but just to let the body know. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Madam Minority Floor Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A question for the bringer of the amendment of the Standing Committee. And going along with the previous speaker, it seems to me that a prosecutor always has an obligation to prove both actus reus and mens rea, and knowingly is that element of it. And if you're finding it confusing, why not, instead of getting rid of the mens rea, get rid of the second part of that sentence, the part that says in such a manner as to deprive the other person of its use or benefit? That doesn't seem to be necessary to me. I mean, if you knowingly use, receive, conceal, abandon, or dispose of property, that should be enough. So I'm just curious if you had thought about that as an alternative rather than getting rid of mens rea.
Representative Ottman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee. I just wanted to say I'm not a lawyer, but I really am in support of this just because it cleans it up towards you don't have to prove intent. It's just that was an action taken, and then this is where we go. So I would vote in favor of the amendment. Thank you.
Representative Crago.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So just to give a little bit of background, the current theft statute is actually a combination of a whole bunch of previous theft statutes that used to exist. And when this statute was enacted, all these other statutes were repealed. And one of them, which we call in the legal world, is receive and conceal. And that's really the subpart we're talking about here, which is Romanet 2. And the statute that it used to be contained in is 63403, and I will get to that in a second. But looking at the bill as it's written, we are not taking out the mens rea, nor does the amendment coming out of committee attempt to take the mens rea out. As I read it, with taking the second knowingly out, we're using the first knowingly, which is contained in subpart A, as your mens rea. That is your mens rea. You always have to prove that, which is, in this case, is you're knowingly taking, and it goes on and on, lists a bunch of other parts of the statute, or acts, I should say, that could constitute theft. And then you have to prove one of those three subparts in addition to that. And so as I read the statute, I believe the knowingly in subpart A actually applies to all of the three subparts. And interestingly enough, on the receive and conceal part of the bill, under the old statute, you didn't have to prove that you knowingly received, concealed, or abandoned. Rather, you had to prove that you knowingly believed it was property of another, which this statute covers that up in subpart A, because it talks about receiving property that you know belongs to another person. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, Representative Oakley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As a prosecutor, I think I would say that I'm surprisingly ambivalent about this. And I'll try to walk through it briefly. But I suppose the ambivalence in itself kind of weighs towards that second knowingly that would be a part of, if you chose that Romanet, it would render it superfluous, which would actually then support eliminating the second knowingly. And the reason I would say using, and I guess the reason I felt compelled and wanted to speak was the good representative from District 13 mentioned getting rid of the second half of that part of Romanet 2. And that's actually where I see basically an imputed, if you will, mens rea as far as the use, receiving, concealing, or abandoning, because it specifically says in such a manner as to deprive the other person of its use or benefit. So what I would say is that knowingly, you have to knowingly take. That's the first part of theft that exists in subsection A. So you've already knowingly taken it, and then to use the good representative from District 48 discussed the use of a trash can, let's say, or using a cell phone. Well, you're still going to knowingly use it, right? So, I mean, you still knowingly used the phone, you still knowingly took the trash can. So I don't know that that second knowingly gets us anywhere. But the second part of that Romanette that requires that it has to be in a manner to deprive the other person of its use or benefit, in combination with knowingly taking or obtaining or exercising control, I think gets you there with theft. So, but I can say this, just my thought, this probably shouldn't even be, but I don't think that this is what juries get into either. So I think perhaps that second knowingly is a little superfluous, in which case that would support deleting it. But I think as you heard from the initial discussion, the idea that juries are going to, necessarily weigh two mens rea as both the same knowingly. And again, I don't even know if that's an appropriate discussion, but in the end, I don't think you hamstring either the statute or the crime or a jury understanding it. So again, I guess I would say that renders that second knowingly superfluous, and I would, and I'm speaking on and for the amendment.
Okay. Well, one more member of the bar, Representative Nicholas.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, I got out and reviewed the statutes last night and again this morning, and I had a conversation with some of the LSO staff reading through this statute. And what I like to see is that we've got some new smart people who are on judiciary. The biggest problem with this statute is not the knowingly language, it's the first couple paragraphs, because it is a very complicated, difficult, and grammatically correct statement. So I would just suggest that you folks work on this definition. Let's get rid of the convoluted Colorado and over time developed definition of theft for penalties. But I would agree with the representative from Fremont County that I think this is really kind of superfluous. It works either way, and I don't think that anyone's trash can is going to make any difference on where this goes. It just depends on what's in the trash can. So.
Okay, we're on Standing Committee Amendment number 1 to House Bill 35. Any further debate? Okay, sensing I heard the question being called. All those in favor of Standing Committee Amendment number 1, please raise your hand and hold them there. Okay, those opposed? Okay, Standing Committee Amendment number 1 to House Bill 35 has been adopted. We're back on the bill. Any further discussion? Seeing none, sensing the committee is ready to vote. All those in favor of House Bill 35, please raise your hand. Those opposed? Okay, thank you. So House Bill 35 has passed the Committee of the Whole. The next bill for our consideration is House Bill 4. The reading clerk will read the bill.
House Bill 4, sponsored by Labor, Mental Health Provision Practice Act Amendments, an act relating to mental health professions, Practice Act. This bill was referred to committee number 10, Labor, Health, and Social Services, and with the recommendation that it do pass with the following amendments. Representatives, the ayes were Representatives Clifford, Connolly, Flitner, Hallinan, Ottman, Martinez, Stivar, Wharf, Wilson. Representative Wilson, Chairman. This bill was further referred to committee number 2, Appropriations. And it was returned with a recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Representative Kinner, Larson Lloyd, Nicholas, Schwartz, Simpson, Stiff, Walters. Signed, Representative Nicholas, Chairman.
Okay, thank you. You've heard the reading of the bill. What is your pleasure, Chairman Wilson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move that when the Committee of the Whole rises to report it, do so with the recommendation that House Bill 4 do pass. And I further move the adoption of the Standing Committee amendment, which I will, and I will explain both the amendment and the bill myself. So I would like to just say, those of you who have been here before, well, actually, all of us might be a little bit of a deja vu from the past couple of days, but you will recognize that this is material that we have considered the last couple of years. And what we actually did over the interim deliberately was divide the contents into 2 parts. You heard the addictions practitioner issue earlier. And then there is this. And we did that because this bill, House Bill 4, really is a cleanup type bill. And the addictions practitioner had a little bit more of the contentious part. And so we just decided we'll do them separately. So, Mr. Chairman, this bill has to do with some cleanup for the entire mental health licensing board professions, which are professional counselor, marriage and family therapist, clinical social worker, addictions therapist. Those are all licensed professions with a master's or a doctorate. And then the certificate programs, which are social worker, addictions practitioner. And then in this bill, we are adding a mental health worker. So the first activity occurs on page 2. And rather remarkably, although we have about 30 professions that require background checks before they are licensed, somehow mental health workers had not been included in that. And we just felt that that was a terrible oversight when you consider people who are clients of mental health workers. I hate to use the word vulnerable because we maybe overuse that in this body, but people who are more vulnerable perhaps to potential abuse or problems, and also who are often in a one-on-one setting with their provider, unlike, say, physical therapists who also have to do background checks. But, if you've been to a physical therapist, they're usually in some sort of a gym thing or something. It would be rather difficult to have anything go amiss there. So page 2, we've got it in 2 separate parts. There's the information on page 2 just directs the criminal justice agencies that they may send the background check information in, and that's all of page 2. And then we'll come back to page 3, but just so you see it on page 4, the top of page 4, that shows that the licensing board may receive the information. And Mr. Chairman, if I may pause here and deal with the amendment, the top of page 4, we have that the board may request criminal history background information on license or certificate applicants. And as we went through this just last week, we decided in committee that although we want them to check on initial licensure or certificate applications, we felt that given how we have been really piling on to the background checks with a lot of professions, that to have to be rechecked every 2 years just adds to the backlog of background checks. And so you'll see the amendment is, and it's a little bit long because there was just some grammatical problems with plugging it into the sentence, But if you look at the amendment, you'll just see that we have indicated that the background check and fingerprinting would be for all initial applicants and then for renewal applicants once every 4 years. So that would be every other renewal. So, Mr. Chairman, if I might take questions specific to the amendment and call for the question on that, if that would be okay.
Yes, I think that's absolutely right. Members, we're on Standing Committee Amendment number 1 to House Bill 4. Any questions?
Question.
Representative Hunt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question on concerning the amendment for the good chairwoman is, we're asking when applicants are renewals, renewing applicants once every 4 years, is that an industry standard? Is that what's been generally adopted for background checks and other professions? Why the 4 years and why the inclusion of that?
Good, Chairman Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, different professions actually have different schedules, I think, as far as how often they renew their licenses. I don't think every profession has it 2 years. I think some might be 3. So I'm not sure that I could actually say. We just felt that every 2 years seemed to be a lot.
All right. Any further questions on the Standing Committee Amendment? I see none. Question being called. All those in favor of Standing Committee Amendment number 1 to House Bill 4, please raise your hand. Hold them there. Okay, opposed? Okay, Standing Committee Amendment number 1 has been adopted. We're back on the bill. Please continue, Chairman Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So backing up to page 3, because I just wanted to touch the background information altogether. We have 2 changes here. One, we are putting in certified mental health worker. This is a bachelor's level profession. And this was actually in statute before, and you'll see at the end of the bill, there's a bunch of sunsetting things. So we are actually taking something that had kind of sunsetted and putting it back in as a very useful certification of a person who can work in all sorts of agencies with basically a bachelor's degree in some sort of, and we'll get onto that next area, but a human behavioral discipline. So at the request of everybody involved, we have that as a certified profession. Then starting on line 16, we're inserting a definition here. And the reason we're doing that, you might think, you know, the statutes have been around for decades, but rather oddly, and I did mention this yesterday, or it feels like we've been here for a year already. I guess it was yesterday. There was wording in the statutes referring to human resource discipline. And somehow that had just kind of sat in there and dragged along for decades. And we just, you know, to us now, human resources means the personnel office. So we put in, and the board had dealt with that in rule, but we felt, seeing as we were cleaning it up, there's no need to have statute say something that the board has to clean up in rule. So we're just cleaning it up while we're here. The human behavioral discipline, and that's, you can see, degrees in addictions, counseling, psychology, and so on. Then turning to page 4, we have the whole body of the certified mental health worker definitions and what the scope of practice is. On line 15, you'll just note that the fee, which is the same fee that all the other bachelor's degree people are charged, $300, and that was what sent it through appropriations. It was very small. If you look at the fiscal note, like $6,000 a year. It was really just a kind of a feature of having to go to appropriations, but that's the usual thing that they do. And the rest of page 4 and the top of page 5 is really pretty much boilerplate for all the various degrees. Page 5, the baccalaureate degree, the standards, they have to take a test, you know, the usual kind of thing. And then the other thing that was really important, and those of you that were here last year will recall some of this discussion, on page 6, we have really tried to address the problem of reciprocity, which was why these mental health issues have been on the Labor Committee's agenda for several years. And that is just making sure that when people move into the state from elsewhere, that we have a good reciprocity statute, one that protects the consumer without unreasonably hampering people from working. And so we've added the paragraph starting on, so page 6, line 16, for good, and you can see that that's D, obviously. So we have other work about reciprocity. For good cause, the board shall issue, line 20, to someone who does not otherwise meet the reciprocity requirements. In other words, the various, I was going to say time and grade, the various years and that sort of thing. And that is just sort of, last year, or maybe it was even 2 years ago, the board tried to do that by rule and say, well, we can actually, if they show us their transcripts and the course wording doesn't match exactly, we could make a decision to accept them anyway. And the office of the attorney that evaluates these things said, well, you don't actually have authority to do that. So we have given them authority where in their judgment there is good cause, they can do that. Then on the top of page 7, we have some repealers, and what the repealers are is way back in 1997, which was, I guess, the last time we significantly updated this. We had grandfathered in licensing for people who'd been employed in the state for 2 years before 1997, at which point, obviously, that is all extraneous, and we are repealing that. So, Mr. Chairman, that is the explanation of the bill, and I'll be glad to take any questions.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman Wilson. Any questions? Okay, I'm not seeing any questions. All right, question being called. All those in favor of Chairman Wilson's motion that when the Committee of the Whole rises reported, do so with the recommendation that House Bill number 4 do pass, please raise your hand. Okay, those opposed? House Bill number 4 is passed Committee of the Whole. Mr. Majority Floor Leader, did you have an update?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, thank you. And ladies and gentlemen of the 66, I'd like to change my order again. And so this will be the new order of Committee of the Whole. So we'll start out kind of the same, 25 be the next bill, then 53, 15, 30, 18, 29, and 62. So, Mr. Chairman, 30 is the insertion. And so thank you. That will be the new order.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Majority Floor Leader. Members, the next bill for our consideration is House Bill 25. The reading clerk will read the bill.
House Bill 25, sponsored by Select Tribal Relations. Tribal Vehicle Registration Exemption Implementation, an act relating to motor vehicles. This bill was referred to Committee number 8, Transportation, Highways, and Military Affairs, which returned a recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Representative Baker, Brown, Burkhart, Burt, Henderson, McGuire, Obermuller, O'Hearn, Stivart. Signed, Representative Burkhart, Chairman.
Okay, you've heard the reading of the bill. What is your pleasure? Chairman Burkhart.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move that when the Committee of the Whole rises to report and do so with the recommendation that House Bill number 25 do pass, and turn the explanation over to the good representative from the center of the state.
Okay, there are several good representatives from the center of the state. Okay, Representative Clifford.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Tribal Relations.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I bring to you House Bill 25 and ask for your favorable consideration. The bill comes through the Select Committee on Tribal Relations. The history behind this bill dates to a 1993 Supreme Court case, which ruled that because of the sovereignty of Indian tribes, tribal members who had vehicles and were living on the reservation would not be required to pay the vehicle registration. The consideration for that ruling was adopted here in 1994, which allows for a waiver for the vehicle registration if, one, the tribal member is an enrolled member of the Eastern Shoshone or Northern Arapaho tribe, and two, that tribal member resides within the exterior boundaries of the Wind River Indian Reservation. The county treasurer tracks the number of waived registration fees, and then the state treasurer reimburses the county for those fees. This statute has had a major impact on Fremont County and a minor one on Hot Springs County. Overall, this bill will streamline an exemption that is already in statute. What this bill does is create a process for tribal people, if nothing changes, not to have to prove eligibility every year. It eliminates tribal members who have had no change in the ability of having to go in each year to verify the same things on the same vehicle when the county treasurer has their record on file. Tribal members will still be required to show proof of vehicle registration insurance at the time of renewing their registration. This bill does not adversely affect the county treasurer from collecting fees. This bill has no fiscal impact. So to walk you through the bill, on page 2, lines 4 through 7, that is amended, and we identified this place in statute. This wording ensures that I, as an enrolled member of the Northern Arapaho tribe, I go in for the first time to register a vehicle. And then this exemption is good for the life of that vehicle as long as I own it, unless I move out of the exterior boundaries of the reservation or I disenroll in my tribe, okay? And then on lines 8 through 9, we delete at the time of registration, again, just to streamline the process. And then lines 10 through 16, that specifies eligibility. And it says, if a tribal member becomes ineligible, it would warrant a tribal member to pay the required registration fee on the vehicle's next annual renewal. And then page 3, lines 1 through 11, it clarifies that the tribal member has a duty to notify the county treasurer within 60 days if something in their eligibility changes. And so you'll see the text on lines 4 through 7. It'll be on the vehicle registration, and it alerts the county treasurer and their staff that the tribal member qualifies for this exemption. And so again, this streamlines this process. And thank you. That's the presentation of the bill. The act will take effect on July 1st, 2021. And thank you. I'll stand for any questions.
Thank you, Representative Clifford. Any questions? Yep, Representative Washut.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Question for the bringer of the bill. How would a county clerk know if someone moved and became ineligible if that person failed to notify the county clerk? Would they simply be allowed to get their license plates until such time as they were discovered?
Representative Clifford.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So how would they know that if they moved? And I'll ask for help from the good chairman of the Select Committee on Tribal Relations, but how would they know that? I guess it's up to the duty of the tribal member to report if they have moved outside of the exterior boundaries of the reservation. And what we do now is there's a form. We have to put our physical address on there. We have to include our tribal enrollment ID number on that. And so it's a signed affidavit. Again, it's at the first time of registration. I guess listening to the testimony that the good chairman provided to the Committee on Transportation, you know, these are laws. I would hope people would be truthful, but you know, at times there's ways to get around the law. But hopefully that answers your question. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and the good representative is correct. Is the responsibility for reporting if that individual disenrolls or moves off the reservation falls upon the owner of the vehicle. And in that, on the registration, it points that out that they have a duty to do that. Can mischief occur? Certainly. Same thing, it's a similar thing to the veterans exemption on vehicle registration. When we were considering this, I reached out to our county treasurer, asked him if they had problems with this. He said, in all vehicle registrations, regardless, there is some burden of mischief that they have to take place, but nothing from this exemption process that is out of the ordinary from the rest of the vehicles that they register in the county, and didn't anticipate that this would increase the possibility of mischief.
Okay. Representative Washit.
Thank you. Just a quick follow-up. And the penalty for someone who would fail to notify, is that specified someplace else in the statute?
Yeah, Representative Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Washit, it is not.
Okay, any further questions, members? No further questions? Question being called. All right. All those in favor of Chairman Burkhart's motion that when the Committee of the Whole rises to report that it do so with the recommendation that House Bill 25 do pass, please raise your hand. Okay, just keep them up there for me, please. Okay, those opposed? Okay, House Bill 25 is passed Committee of the Whole. And I now, something that I don't normally have, but I do have sympathy for Speaker Barlow in counting hands. It's not necessarily my nature. Okay, the next bill for our consideration is House Bill 53. The reading clerk will read the bill.
House Bill 53, sponsored by Agriculture, Invasive Plant Species, an act relating to agriculture. This bill was referred to Committee Number 5, Agriculture, State and Public Lands, and Water Resources, to which returned a committee recommendation that it do pass with the following amendments. Ayes, Representative Clausen, Eklund, Larson Dan, Western, Winter. Noes, Blackburn, Fortner, Heiner, Worf. Signed, Representative Eklund, Chairman.
Okay, you've heard the reading of the bill. What is your pleasure, Chairman Eklund?
Mr. Chairman, I move that when the Committee of the Whole rises to report, it do so with the recommendation that House Bill 53 do pass. I further move the amendment, Standing Committee Amendment Number 1 to House Bill 53, and I'll turn over the floor management of the bill to my Vice Chairman of the Ag Committee.
Okay, could the Vice Chairman of the Ag Committee raise their hand? I don't know who it is.
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Representative Clausen.
Mr. Chairman, I bring you House Bill 53, Invasive Plant Species, and ask for your favorable consideration. The background of this bill is it comes from 2 years of culmination of the Chief Executive's Invasive Species Initiative. I'll just jump right into the bill. I'll start with the amendment. So I'll dispose of the amendment first. I'd like to move amendment number 1 to House Bill 53, Standing Committee Amendment number 1 to House Bill 53, and ask for your favorable consideration. The first portion of it is just grammar, getting rid of an A. The second portion of it removes control or changes control to management. And the third portion of it is simply our perennial schizophrenic argument of how to advertise. And I think we've landed on the right answer. But Moving along to the bill, or do we need to vote on the bill?
Representative Clausen, why don't we go ahead and work the standing committee amendment? So members, we're on standing committee amendment number 1 to House Bill 53. Any questions for Representative Clausen? Any questions? Okay, then sensing you're ready to vote, all those in favor of standing committee amendment number 1, House Bill 53, raise your hand. Okay, those opposed? Those opposed, keep your hands up, please. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, standing committee amendment number 1 has been adopted. We are back on the bill. Please proceed, Representative Clausen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So House Bill 53, pages 2 and 3 are simply codifying cooperation and coordination between agencies and the good university over the hill and our community colleges to do some, just codifies what they're already doing. The meat of this bill is page 6, line 5, the repealer, which allows for the second mill for districts to be used for more species. Currently, they're just the special management mill, which can be only used for 2 species, and this allows it to be used for more than 2 species. And line 5, let's see, page 5, line 8 through 14 is simply the notice of the bill, and with that I'll stand for, or the notice in the newspapers and how it needs to be handled, and with that I'll stand for any questions.
Okay, Representative Summers, Mr. Majority Floor Leader, excuse me.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I stand on in support of this bill. This is just simply an attempt to get better coordination between agencies on control of invasive species. Invasive species has been and continues to be a huge problem in this state, and this is just I know my local weed and pest district is really behind this bill, and it's just an attempt to get more coordination and more authority by getting rid of that by that repealer. It allows them to work on more weeds and add to the list. So, Mr. Chairman, I stand in support of this bill.
Chairman Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess my question is just, and I'm very in favor of getting rid of weeds. I think that's great, but restarting with the bottom of, on page 1, the statute is created to read, and then a really long list of things to do. How did you get away with no agency impact or fiscal note? You know, usually I put out a bill that's got like one thing that I want someone to do for an hour and a half, and they come back with a fiscal note of $300,000 and an FTE or something. So can you just, you said they were doing it already, but just flesh that out a little bit for me if you would. Thank you.
So Representative Clausen, I'm going to have you take notes, and I'm going to work through these questions. I had Representative Schwartz next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And mine's a similar question. When you look at the bottom of page 1, it's a shall aid county weed and pest districts. But once again, there's no fiscal note. So I'm assuming that any additional financial burden that is created is assumed by the county districts without support from the state. Is that correct?
Okay. Representative Fortner. Okay. Representative Fortner, you're next.
Thank you, Speaker. I have voted no against this bill for the simple reason I believe there's going to be a whole nother phase of government added to what we already have. Our local weed and pest, I visited with them, and they seem to be in favor of this bill. If this bill does come without any expansion of government, I am for that.
Okay. Representative Worf.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I too did not support this bill. When I looked at it, it still continues in my mind. It has a bunch of superfluous stuff that doesn't mean anything. Talks about coordinating and developing and all this stuff. Not typical language that I've seen in bills that I've worked with in the past. The question still remains. I know there was a lot of support for the repeal. There, Section 3, it's Wildlife Statute or Wyoming Statute 11.5-303B. That's the one that restricts it to 2 species of invasive plants. As far as one of the things I've always looked at is there's usually a reason why things are in statute. And one of the questions that was asked that I have not had an answer yet is why did they restrict it to 2? And I'm a little bit inclined to believe it's restricted to 2 because local county weed and pest only have 2 mills that they can generate. And I would imagine that there's some concern that if you remove that restriction, there's quite a litany list of invasive species of plants, and that 2 mill levy may not be enough to cover what the counties have. And I guess that's the concern that still keeps coming back to me, that I see this as a way of growing government. I see it as being a way to perhaps take money out of our county's hands by taking the money from the weed and pest mill levies and basically taking all those funds and using them, tying them up in research projects through the University of Wyoming. So that's why I spoke against it. I'm still not convinced that this is a good bill. And so I am going to urge you to vote against it. And I'll end there. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Nyman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To give you some idea on kind of how this works, I've been just recently retired from the Cook County Weed and Pest, and our issue that we faced up there is that leafy spurge, and they gave us basically 2 species that we could split this up between and focus on. But as we see different issues coming into our districts and our areas, we have started to see, and we've discussed it before, Ventonata, Medusa head. And so what it does is it will allow these districts to be able not to expand government or anything like that. It just helps us to be able to expand basically the scope or the numbers of invasives that we can go after. I mean, we have 2 right now available. This would allow us to add a species to that to be able to be attacked and not have to let some of that grow. And so it would provide, I guess you would say, some latitude for the districts to be able to go after some different invasives, maybe be more proactive. To give you an example, Ventonata is moving into our area, more in Campbell County. But if we are proactive and able to jump on it sooner, we can hold down a lot of the expenses to come if we can utilize some of these while not taking a lot of dollars away from leafy spurge control, which what this was initially in our area is very dominant. So I am in support of this legislation. Thank you.
Chairman Eklund, I had you on my list, but your hand is down. Did you wish to speak?
Can a little bit to some of these, probably to some of these issues. I don't know if you want questions answered now.
I just had you on my list. You can wait if you want.
I'll talk about a little bit of it. So kind of building on what the last representative spoke about, this list of species just keeps growing, and it's kind of hard to not expand your control and what you do as a weed and pest district. These the people on those districts have their hands full. Management is definitely a better word than control, because you just never run out of work when it comes to noxious weeds. These 2 new ones are just like cheatgrass, I think, only maybe worse. They're less palatable. You can at least use cattle to take care of some of the cheatgrass problems. There are some weeds that, because we haven't been very proactive with, we haven't been able, we don't have a handle on them. cheatgrass is one of them. It wasn't even on the list when I was years ago on an agronomy judging team. It wasn't a noxious weed because it was a winter annual. It wasn't a perennial. Now we can put that on. The two new weeds talked about, the grasses that are invading from the north are winter annuals too, I believe. Anyway, they're tough to contain. Dalmatian toadflax, I'll just kind of go through a list of problems that should have been worked on before. When I was much younger and first started farming and ranching, this was just an occasional plant you saw here and there. Had we worked on it a long time ago, we wouldn't be driving past the city of Cheyenne out in the ranchettes looking at what appears to be fields of sweet clover. Well, it's not. It's this yellow flowering Dalmatian toadflax that people some folks just think it's a pretty flower. It isn't. It's hard to control. The weed and pest has done their best. This gives them some flexibility to work on some things that are a real problem. And if we get on it now, maybe it won't infest the whole state and become a much bigger problem for everybody. If we give the weed and pest districts a chance to work on them, then I think that they can probably nip it in the bud is a better way to do it. The other part of this, the reason there's no fiscal note is the weed and pest usually manages their own mill levy. And sometimes the full 2 mills that they're allowed isn't enough. But at least they can expand out from where they are and not just work on 2 species. As far as expansion of government, I just don't see it that way. I see it as a way of helping land managers do their job.
Okay. Representative Newsom.
Mr. Chairman, I had a question on page 3, line 5, is about reporting. And it seems to want reports on all sorts of funding, current funding models, existing, new funding, challenges, opportunities for funding, but no comment about what the progress is on using these funds for invasive species. So I'm wondering where that fits, the actual reporting on how it's going.
Okay, I got Representative Larson, Dan.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I kind of talking first for a second and kind of see how it goes. Thanks. I guess I don't have to do that now. Sorry.
Representative Larson, we're committee of the whole. You can talk as long as you want.
I think I'll wait and kind of come back in.
Okay, very good. Representative Hunt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll try not to get into the weeds here, but I'll try not to backtrack over what's already been said. But there's a few things that I do want to reiterate about some of the folks, some of the concerns that some folks might have. And so going back to what the good chairwoman of Labor Health asked. While this does create a whole, appears to create some new language and some new duties and requirements, this is not really anything that isn't already being done. We are simply codifying what is already being put into, what is already in practice, okay? And just sort of clarifying those duties and those requirements of the folks involved. And what keeps coming up is this an expansion of government? Absolutely not. For one, again, look to the fiscal note, there is none. There is no money in this. There's no, and just speaking a little bit more broadly to our process and how our bills are put together, we are very strict in the Wyoming legislature to the point that, to the issue of bills being germane to the topic about which they address. And so The reason that there is nothing in here about the university over the hill or any particular language about research is because that's not what is being allowed in here. If that were being allowed, you would see language pertaining to that matter. So while there is some language concerning rules and regulations, again, that is simply allowing the state board and if need be, local boards, local weed and pest boards, to adjust accordingly to more efficiently deal with the invasive species problem that is growing out from the north central part of the state into the eastern side of the state, as the good representative, the new rep from House District 1 just stated. And as was discussed yesterday, I'm not familiar so much with the history. I mean, I'd have to go pull up prior bills, but that off the top of my head, I don't recall the large projects bill that was discussed yesterday, which came out of our TOW committee, specifying funding for the combating of invasive species. So I think that that bill, and I think that that provision in that bill speaks to the seriousness of the problem that's growing out of that part of the state, Mr. Chairman. And so this is just putting more tools in the toolboxes of both the state board and our local county boards, and is helping them hopefully to better get a handle on this and get ahead of these invasive species that continue to encroach on an ever expanding area. So, Mr. Chairman, I guess I'll stop ranting. Thank you.
Representative Zwanitzer. Chairman Zwanitzer, excuse me.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I really like the idea, and what worries me about the bill, sometimes it's really great in practice when people do things, but you put it in statute and we're gonna have some issues. So I need two questions answered about the mechanics of what we're doing. First is on the bottom of page 3. So the Weed and Pest Council itself is really just made up of a majority. It's basically a board of all the weed and pest councils from each county, and they have an executive management group. So I have some consternation when we talk about that the Weed and Pest Council is now getting the authority to adopt and publish rules, right? With a majority of, assumedly, their membership. So 13 of those weed and pest councils can agree that we're going to go after, a certain noxious weed, and we're going to partner with the federal government and the university. What happens if I'm one of the 12 counties who's not so excited about that federal interference in my county? How does that work when we're allowing them basically rulemaking authority from a non-governmental board? In my opinion, it's more of a conglomeration or confederacy of local weed and pest councils. And then I have the same or similar concern with what the chairman of Labor Health put out. I think it's on the top of page 6. So we're taking out the State Board of Agriculture from doing these duties, which is an appointed board by the governor, confirmed by the Senate. And we're now going to allow the Weed and Pest Council, which again is a member of every county's weed and pest, and they form their own council, but they're not really popularly elected or appointed, but we're giving them governmental administrative duties. Could somebody help me out if we're all comfortable with that?
So Chairman Eklund or Representative Clausen, either one of you, I think we need to address that question now.
I'll do it.
Okay,
Mr.
Representative,
Chairman.
Go ahead, Representative Clausen.
So I'll speak to that question. So yes, there's rulemaking authority, or it allows for rulemaking authority from the Weed and Pest Council, but it also has to be approved by the Board of Ag. So that kind of lays to that question. Let's see the second part on page. That is the second part, page 6. Yeah, so it still has to be approved by the Board of Agriculture, but it goes through the council to start with the rulemaking. Let's see. I think does that answer the question, Mr. Chairman? We're pretty close.
Chairman Zwanitzer, I'll give you a little leeway here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't read it that way, but let me encourage the bill because the intent is really good today, and I will go do my homework and read the whole statute tonight
and make sure what I'm being told is what I'm reading. So thank you for looking into that. But if other people want to look into that as well, I'd be appreciative.
Okay. Representative Heiner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. When I first read this bill, I had a hard time deciding up or down with this bill. There are some very good portions of the bill and other sections that I was concerned about. Now, the part about repealing the restrictions on the invasive species or the pests that they can focus on, I am very much in favor of that, because if they are focusing on a couple of invasive species and then during the middle of the summer they have a grasshopper infestation, they had a hard time with that because they already were focused on what was statutorily allowing them to focus on. So that was a great opportunity. This is a great opportunity to remove that restriction. But my concern was with the other portion of the bill, that we have a weed and pest group that they get a limited amount of funds through their mills, and they try to put as much of that on the ground as they can. And if in conversations with my local weed and pest manager, he says that when they have to consult with the university, it costs them money. And he says it's not cheap. So anytime that we require that they do socio-ecological studies, it's going to cost our local weed and pest districts money that they would rather put into actual eradication of invasive species or pests. With that being said, in conversation with my local weed and pest manager, they are in support of this bill. So I originally voted against it in committee, but I will change my vote to support them, even though I think he has the same thought as I do. There are the good outweighs the bad of this bill, and removing that limitation is something that they dearly need at this time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Chairman Olson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's possible that my concern may be addressed now, actually, with the last speaker. I just continue to stare at this fiscal note and stare at this bill and contemplate all the things that it's asking to occur for the council to do, and there not be an increase in expenditures. And that consultation with the university, coordinating with the University of Wyoming, colleges, et cetera. Anytime you take an action like that, there's people meeting, there's reports being drafted. And then I go down further and I think about, how are you going to coordinate with state and federal agencies and increase public awareness and not spend any money? That's what's interesting to me, because how do you increase public awareness without a dollar figure? Maybe that doesn't, I don't know if that's a pamphlet, if that's a website, whatever it is. And so maybe I'm just having a hard time understanding where the cost burden goes, because I don't know that much about, these local weed and pest boards. So maybe someone from agriculture can help me understand, is it just that there's no cost to the state of Wyoming and that's being borne locally? Is that what's happening with all of these directives? You just go down the list of directives from 11-5-120 and you go down that list of Romanettes I through, or 1 through 7. We're asking for 7 things to occur, and who is bearing the cost of those? And if there is no cost, then that's assumed, then it appears to me that the agencies involved are saying that they maybe already have the money within their budget, and they're going to it's just going to be, the cost will just be shared in what's already existing. And then that causes me to wonder, well, then there's just extra money to accomplish those 7 goals. So I guess I'm just having a hard time with that. I don't want to hang up on that fiscal note, because I know you have a 0 fiscal note, but maybe help me understand how that burden is actually where it's placed. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Henderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, it's a good discussion, and it's
it's caused me to consider a couple of things I hadn't thought about the last 4 years on the Ag Committee. If you look at page 6, please, at the top, the main thing that stands out to me, given all of these considerations that we've talked about, is what are we going to be gaining with the Weed and Pest Council having a rulemaking authority and so forth that we don't already have with the State Board of Agriculture? I mean, are we solving the right problem here? Thank you.
Representative Flintner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Great questions. And I'm sure that the good committee chairman or vice chairman will probably have some really great answers. But as a landowner and also as a member of this invasive task force, I would urge the body's support. We have seen invasive species can grow in problem, and specifically these two that have reared their ugly head in Sheridan County. I think it's important for our weed and pest boards to be far more nimble than they had the ability to be. And I think we can come back if we need to do so in second and third to clarify some language. But at this point, I just would urge your support of this. Invasive species cost states hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars. And it's critical that we learn how to be a little more nimble and jump on these a little sooner than we have in the past. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Nyman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to kind of maybe bring a little bit of clarity to some of what the questions have been brought. The question was asked by a representative that what do we get by changing it over to the Weed and Pest Council? The Weed and Pest Council is a group that is formed by one representative from each district. So what that does is when I was on the Weed and Pest in Crook County, we would send a representative to serve on that council. So what it is basically doing is providing more local control and more local oversight of each one of these. And so we appreciated that opportunity when I served on the board. Also, it will allow us as applicators and people in these districts to be, and it's been mentioned, a lot more latitude in being able to address issues that come up quickly. For example, we had a major problem with grasshoppers this summer, and we got behind the ball on that, and we didn't get it quick enough, and landowners were calling, and we simply didn't have the money to be able to help out with a lot of that stuff. And so we were forced into a situation we had to go back into savings that we had been accumulating and try to help those landowners to get some interest to be able to curb that issue. Another issue that we see, and we're trying to kind of wrap our minds around, is that it won't create a situation where there's more money. The districts operate within their mill. There's one mill for general, and then there's a second mill for special management, and that they can only operate. So there again, it is so vital that we have local control and good operators, because we have to make this money stretch. And what we're wanting to do is have some latitude that we can basically attack situations as they come up and be proactive and not have to be bound by those couple issues or the couple species that we're tied to. I think, again, a Ventonata is that we primarily put our money towards leafy spurge. We've got a problem coming from the west, and we need to get that stopped now before it becomes a major issue. And so this will allow us more latitude to do that. So I do again repeat my support for this, and do support this legislation. Thank you.
Mr. Majority Floor Leader.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And I think I'm going to try to, I think I can get this done by looking at the statutes on two screens, Mr. Chairman, but I'd like to answer the question on the rulemaking authority. So if you go into the bill, on page 6, and at the top of the page, you'll see G, and it says the State Board of Agriculture, the State Board of Agriculture stricken out. And then the new language is Wyoming Weed and Pest Council with approval of the majority of the board. And the board they're talking about there is the Ag Board. And so if you go into statute, Mr. Chairman, and you go into what G actually says, it says the State Board of Agriculture may, and then it goes 1, adopt rules and regulations as provided by 11.519 to implement an effective special management program in Wyoming. And it, goes on to Romanet 2 as well. So really what this is doing is exactly what the vice chairman said. And that is really a recommendation to the Board of Ag, who can already promulgate rules on this subject. So I hope that clarifies it. And then, just once again, this council exists. I think the good representative from House District 1 has spoke about his association with that council. We're not creating new government. There's no fiscal impact. It's just an attempt to get all the cats herded, right? This is just a cat herding project on weeds. So on in support of this bill.
Representative Fortner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've worked in the weed business for over 20 years. I learned to associate with my local weeding pest in UW. There's two pluses to come out of this. It frees up UW to do more grants.
My computer quit, so I'm.
What?
My computer quit, so I'm not online.
Okay.
It frees UW up to do more grants. It also frees the local weed and pest up to find somebody to help them do federal BLM pesticide use proposals. So both of those is a big plus as far as time consumers. I know I got an echo going on here, so I'm for this bill. Thank you.
Representative Worf.
Yeah, Mr. Speaker, the main reason why I say this grows government is because it was brought up in the committee meeting. About half the counties right now in the weed and pest are using their full 2 mills. The other half are using 1 mill or half of a mill. And they talked about this will obligate all the counties to use the full 2 mills. And so I do think that is a growth of government, because you are going to have the counties that in the past have been doing only 1 mill. They're going to be obligated to go to 2 mills. And that is why it was a concern to me. I want to support the local weed and pest guys, but I look at if half of them are only assessing 1 mill levy, I don't know that we want to obligate them to go to the second mill. If a county is maxed the amount of mills they can collect, I don't know who they're going to take the money from, but that's my understanding is that money'd have to come out of the county somewhere. Thank you.
Okay. Representative Ottman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee. I just wanted to say I really appreciate all of the people involved in ag and the people that are on this board, because you're the experts and a lot of you live it. And invasive plant species are something that we can't tolerate. I did have a question though on page 2. And we all know words mean things. So I a question on some verbiage where it says about developing and implementing data systems to support each district. Then in numerate 2, coordinating with university and community colleges to assess to the extent practical impacts as used in this paragraph, socio-ecological systems. And then on line 17, coordinating with university, community colleges, and government agencies to support and expand outreach and provide applied research. Listening to all of this very interesting conversation across the board and with the community colleges and things, is this going to, could this be interpreted that they are now required to develop these programs and participate in this? Thank you.
Chairman Eklund.
Thank you, Chairman. So I'll start by answering some of that on page 2, Romanet 1, 2, and 3. All of these are are already done. And the main reason I know that, I don't believe we even discussed it in committee, but the reason I know that is I do it. I call them up. I try to figure out some of this stuff. And I especially use the research stations. They're already, they're doing this, this work that we need to have done. And that's part of why the fiscal note isn't, is kind of at zero. We're just, some of this is codifying what's already done. The University of Wyoming and community colleges are involved. I would say especially at the research level. And I had another question I wanted to answer from the chairman of corporations. He asked about the majority of the board. What happens if the majority of the board disagrees on something? There will be disagreement. Oftentimes, the rules and the way this will be set up, the weeds that'll be set up, that county probably doesn't have to deal with the same weeds. So they're not going to adopt those rules. As far as the mill levy goes, I don't think that 2 mil, you get pushed there when you don't have the tax base. So some of the counties that have a fairly small tax base, I think are pushed to get anything done with 1 mil, and this just gives them the flexibility to jump on those problems, and we see them coming from the north all the time. Well, right now we do. Anyway, hope that answers some of the questions. I hope you'd move this bill along. If we need to fix some things, we'll try to. If we could just repeal that one section and that would work, well, that'd be fine, except all of this other was in support. All of this other material needed to be in place before we can repeal it, is my understanding of this bill.
Okay. Representative Larson. Dan?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I was hoping not to get involved, but I got to. The good representative from the southwest corner of the state, this bill will not obligate any district to increase their mill levy, much less seeking to establish a second mill. And I'm not real good at the second mill issues, but it is often referred to as a special management program, the second mill. I have quite an echo going, I'm sorry. And only allows 2 species to be managed, don't I? Okay, with that mill, with 1 species being leafy spurge. But the main issue of this bill is to try to get it passed so they can address more than 2 species of invasive weeds or even insects. And this is a good bill. Let's get her passed.
Representative Ottman, do you have another question, or just didn't take your hand down after the last time? Okay. Representative Hunt, why don't you try to bring us home?
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. And I will try and do just that. Just to quickly reiterate, this bill does not expand, grow, enlarge government in any way, shape, or form. And as to the issue of that's been brought up about local mill levies, I don't know. I wouldn't certainly have a list right in front of me of which counties are and are not already bumping up against the 2 mill levy limit. But that was never brought up as a topic of concern or an issue in any of the testimony that was heard throughout the interim that I recall. So it's again, that is certainly up to the counties as to whether or not they do that, and how that, that is their discretion. So I did really quickly want to specifically try and answer the question from the good representative from District 34. No, the new language in the bill does not require that the university expand its operations or its its duties in any way, shape, or form. It's already doing what is spelled out there, and should not have any additional burdens put on it. So Mr. Chairman, again, on and in favor of the bill, has been well vetted, and hopefully will give our local weed and pest districts, as well as the state conglomerate, additional, boost in combating the war on weeds. Thank you.
Okay, members, any further discussion? None that I could think of, but I might be wrong. Is there any more discussion?
Question.
Okay, question being called. All of those in favor of Chairman Eklund's motion that when the committee of the whole rises report to do so with the recommendation that House Bill 15 do pass, please raise your hand. Okay, those opposed? One, hold still. Okay. House Bill 15 has passed committee of the whole. Just a casual observation is this group very much likes to talk about weed and weeds. So we've established that. Okay.
Sir, that was House Bill 53.
That was House Bill 53. Thank you.
Thank you.
The next bill for our consideration is House Bill 15. The reading clerk will read the bill.
House Bill 15, sponsored by corporations, elections, and political subdivisions, Department of Transportation Communication Facilities, an act relating to the Department of Transportation. This bill was referred to committee number 2, which returned a committee recommendation that it do pass. Ayes Representatives Blackburn, Clausen, Clifford, Duncan, Ayer, Hunt, McGuire, Roscoe, Zwanitzer. Signed Representative Zwanitzer, Chairman. It was re-referred to committee number 2, which returned a committee recommendation that it do pass. Ayes Representatives Kinner, Larson Lloyd, Nicholas, Schwartz, Simpson, Stiff, Walters. Signed Representative Nicholas, Chairman.
You've heard the reading of the bill. What is your pleasure, Chairman Zwanitzer?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move when the committee of the whole rise to report, it do so with the recommendation that House Bill 15 do pass. There are no standing committee amendments, and I would turn over management of the bill to the good Vice Chairman of Transportation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative McGuire, please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and to members of the House of Representatives. I bring to you House Bill number 15, which was brought to us by the Wyoming Department of Transportation. As many of you know, they have been engaged in building an infrastructure of towers in order to facilitate communication with the WildLink emergency communication system. At this point, on some of the towers, they have excess space, and the purpose of this bill is if a telecommunications company were to come to them and ask them if they could lease excess capacity, that the Department of Transportation can look at that. They have discretion as to whether or not to accept that application, and also any monies that they may receive from leased areas would be redeposited into a WildLink tower maintenance account, which would be created in this bill. Funds in the account would be appropriated to the department and shall only be used to maintain, reinforce, or repair the WildLink network towers. One of the questions that came up in committee is if you look at the fiscal note, the amount anticipated revenue is quite low. And one of those reasons is that the sites that are being built right now for WildLink are typically in very rural areas. Often they're to get the signal through a valley or something like that. So many of these towers are not in an area where a provider would really be interested in it. So they anticipate that there will be some interest, but it's not going to be a huge amount. And again, what they would like is the ability to act in the best interests of the state to try to raise a little revenue, and with that revenue, use the money to maintain these towers. So with that, I would turn it over for questions, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you for the explanation. Before I go to questions, I need a question of the chief clerk. My sheet shows an amendment, but I don't see an amendment listed on the website. Is there a committee of the whole?
There are no amendments, sir.
Okay, thank you, chief clerk.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll go to questions. Representative Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, I'm curious on the continuous appropriation. I always get nervous about that, and the appropriations folks, I'm curious if there's any discussion on that. I just think that having a continuous appropriation here is probably inappropriate. I'm fine with the concept. That's fine, but I think that we should have legislative control over those funds and be able to have oversight. Thank you.
Representative Heiner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I stand in favor of this bill, but I have a question. I know it's very expensive to build out these communication backbone systems and build towers and everything. And I very much support that if there's excess space to be able to share that with other companies. But is there a reciprocity? And is there an opportunity out there for our WildLink to put dishes on other broadband towers rather than having to build their own? And so I hope there's a give and take there amongst the companies such that we can better utilize funds that way by utilizing their tower when it's in an appropriate spot. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Majority Floor Leader.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And just so the body kind of understands the origins of this bill. This last interim, we had a broadband task force, which I was the chairman of. And this bill actually came out of that task force and then went to corporations. And really, for the most part, what we're doing in here is codifying existing practice of the Wyoming Department of Transportation. You know, when we got to looking at the statute, things weren't really aligning with what they did in practice. And then to kind of talk to the last commenters, the last representatives, my neighbor to the south, by the way, that my neighbor to the south's questions is the good department, the department that runs our highways. They do all kinds of deals like that with telecom companies. So they exchange accesses, each other's accesses. And so this just helps them be able to do that in a more statutory way. And as it relates to the fund that's created, you know, that's, you know, I'm sure that appropriations over time can track that. If they want to change that, they can bring an amendment. That's fine. But the idea was really here is there a way to bring statute in line with practice, perhaps find a little funding source for WildLink, which we all love so very much, those of you that have been here for any length of time. And so that was the idea. And thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Thank you, Representative Stibar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The broadband, I know we're trying to get broadband throughout the state, and I'd like to look at a little more information. This is what I do for the railroad. We just put antennas on a bunch of towers through a canyon to the state to the south to open up the broadband in that area. Has this been discussed on that aspect?
Representative Summers, do you want to just answer that real quick?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And Representative, good representative that has worked on this issue from this city, we did not discuss the railroad system and towers there. That's good to know. Certainly, you know, we've been looking for any way to try to expand and maybe after this, if that good representative would get us that information, maybe we can follow up with it with the Broadband Council. But if you have some ideas, I'm certainly willing to take them elsewhere. Thank you.
Representative Washa.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question has to do with this creation of a new account, those WyoLink funding account. You know, it seems like every month or so, I'm getting something in my end basket about consolidating to a single checking account and a single savings account from another branch of our state government. And yet here we are looking at creating yet another account. Has that been discussed? Is there any desire on part of this body to try and limit the number of accounts?
Okay, Representative Stivar.
Back on the point is not railroad towers. I'm talking about the towers.
Representative Stivar, right? I got to ask you, we've been a little lax, but please work
Sorry,
through
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Through the chair. I'm not talking about railroad towers. I'm talking about these WyoLink towers and state towers to open the broadband up in these rural parts of the state where these towers are at. Was that discussed?
Okay. Representative Summers, I had you next.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And to the good representative before me, yes, that was one of the reasons behind this bill, was to try to encourage more use of these WyoLink towers for broadband access and to make the statute pretty simple. And so that is part of it. Ultimately, the telecom company will decide whether that tower fits their desire for expansion. And the state is not going to probably put up its own equipment to provide that, because then that would be competing with private companies. But no, we have done that. And so just as it relates to funds, right? Those of you who are not on appropriations and the good representative from the center of the state, do we need another fund? Well, that's a question we'll ask and answer here. If you want to carve that out, you can. But we have many of these throughout agencies that are special revenues accounts. In other words, they generate, and I'll give it the one example. Would it be an agency that deals with agriculture, and they go out and they have for example, they'll certify scales and they'll charge those that need a scale certified a fee, and then they put that in an account, and that's part of a special revenue account that then they help pay for that program. So it's entirely consistent with how we do things in state government. Whether we want to create another one, that's the will of this body, but it's certainly, we have a ton of those throughout the budgets. I could name 20 of them probably, but I'm not gonna. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you. Representative Roscoe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was on that committee, and creating a separate account was brought to us by YDOT, and it was just an attempt to keep it simple so they wouldn't be thrown in with a lot of other funds, and it was just a lot cleaner way to go, and not at all unusual. Thank you.
Representative Fortner.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will this create any avenue for eminent domain? If it does, I'm not for it. Thank you.
Okay, any further questions? Anyone wish to speak further on the bill? Representative McGuire.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the good majority floor leader for helping out with that. With regard to the question on accounts, I would also add that YDOT is not a general fund department. And so there are always administrative fees when you do throw things into the general fund. So it is appropriate for them to have a small account. And again, the purpose of the account is listed in the statute, and also what happens with the funds. So I think that is probably okay, and I hope that addresses it. If not, I'd be happy to go back and get some more clarification. With regard to eminent domain, I don't think that will be an issue. These are existing towers that have been permitted and built pursuant to all of the county and state regulations. And what it is on existing towers, They are offering, if a company comes and wants to lease space, they are offering them an opportunity to lease some space. So I think that answers, or the myself or either the good majority floor leader have answered the questions that I had written down. So if there are other questions, please let me know.
Representative Fortner.
My questions has been answered. My hand is stuck, so I have no idea.
Okay.
Let's move on to the other representative, please. Thank you.
Very
There
good.
we go.
Representative Nyman. Representative Nyman, you're on mute. There you go.
Sorry, is that got it? Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just have one quick question in regards to just a thought as a landowner, and I have given easements to people to place towers and run power lines and stuff through. Is there any concern about the fact that if an easement has been given to the state to put this tower there, would there need to be any looking into the fact that if they have multiple other users traveling that same easement going back and forth, when somebody, you know, made the easement with them thinking it would only be used occasionally to go and service or whatever. And now let's say, for example, you put 10 different groups on that tower that are doing stuff, and then it increases the amount of use of that easement and stuff. Is there a consideration given that that would have an effect, or does that easement that was given to the state allow them to allow anybody to be able to travel back and forth to use it? Just as a curiosity question. Thank you, sir.
Okay. Representative Clausen.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Speaking to the last question, yes, this is a may. So that exact point came up in committee, and they may lease if they don't have those kinds of arrangements with the landowner that it sits on, or if there's a problem, they're not forced to use eminent domain or anything like that.
Okay. Any further discussion? Okay. We're on House Bill 15. Okay, no question being called. All those in favor of Chairman Zwanitser's motion that when the Committee of the Whole rises report, to do so with the recommendation that House Bill 15 do pass, please raise your hand. Okay, those opposed? Okay, House Bill 15 has passed the Committee of the Whole. The next bill for our consideration is House Bill 30. This was an adjustment to your schedule. Okay, House Bill 30. The reading clerk will read the bill.
House Bill 30, sponsored by Revenue, Public Utility Assessment, an act relating to utilities. This bill was referred to Committee Number 3, Revenue, which returned a committee recommendation that it do pass with the following amendments. Ayes, Representatives Baker, Hallinan, Harshman, Henderson, Roscoe, Sweeney, Yin. Noes, Gray, and Jennings. Signed, Representative Harshman, Chairman.
You've heard the reading of the bill. What is your pleasure, Chairman Harshman?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move that when the Committee of the Whole rises to report, that it do so with a recommendation that House Bill number 30 do pass. And Mr. Chairman, I further move the adoption of the Standing Committee amendment. I'd like to move that amendment and maybe take the vote on that. And then the amendment simply cuts the potential rate increase in half. And so I think that'll be well supported, and as well as cleans up a little language for rural electric utilities that was presented by industry. So if there's any discussion, I'd be happy to take it, but I'd like to dispatch with a standing committee amendment, then we'll move on to the bill.
Okay, I think that's reasonable, Mr. Chairman. Okay, so members, we're on standing committee amendment number 1 to House Bill 30. Any discussion? Seeing none. All those in favor of standing committee amendment number 1, raise your hand. Okay. Those opposed? Keep those up, please. Those opposed? Okay, standing committee amendment number 1 has been adopted. Members, we also have a committee of the whole amendment, but we're going to walk through the bill, take questions on the bill, and then we'll hit that committee of the whole amendment. So, Chairman Harshman, please proceed.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And members, I sent, if we were all in session together, you'd have a paper one pager delivered to your desk. And so I emailed that out to you 10, 15 minutes ago. So it's in your inbox, has some background information on the bill. I've asked the good representatives from House Districts 60 and 58. And I think the good representative from House District 58 in Casper will start off. Those two gentlemen will floor manage the bill. And as I said in my email, this bill, Mr. Chairman, is really it could be a corporations bill too. It's really kind of one of those bills in between. And so the good chairman of corporations knows a lot about this issue as well. So I'm sure you'll hear from him. But if we could, Mr. Chairman, turn it over to the good representative from House District 58.
Thank you.
Sorry about that. Go ahead, Representative Sweeney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I bring you House Bill 30, Public Utility Assessments, and ask for your favorable consideration. You would have received that email 15 minutes ago, but now it's been more than an hour from the good Chairman of Revenue, which will give you an overview of the Public Service Commission and what this bill will do to continue the complex mission of the Public Service Commission in the Office of Consumer Advocacy within the PSC's budget. A few important facts from the handout. While you're looking for that and finding that, this bill allows the PSC to apply additional utility assessment not to exceed 1/1000th or an additional mill now as amended up to 4 mills as amended against those persons defined as public utilities in statutes, but not cooperative utilities exempt from retail rate regulation. Current law caps the utility assessment at 30 cents or 3 mills per $100 of utility expense. HB 30, as amended in House Revenue, increases the cap to 40 cents per 100 or 4 mills of utility expense for customers in Tier 2 investor-owned utilities, intrastate pipelines, rate-regulated rural electric association, REAs. And no change to Tier 1. The Public Service Commission is responsible for regulating approximately 1.7 billion of sales of essential basic services of electric, gas, pipeline, water, and telecom provided to Wyoming industries, businesses, and homes to ensure safe, adequate, and reliable service at just and reasonable rates. I'll draw your attention to, at the bottom of page 1 there, that chart. There's a total of, in the Public Service Commission, there's a total of 37 full-time equivalents plus 1 AWAC. The PSC dockets an average of 288 utility matters each year. An annual average of 20 to 25 major cases require contested hearings. And those are quite honestly like a trial. They've got one coming up shortly that's actually eight days long with their staff. Since 2010, PSC's decisions in general rate cases approved rates saving ratepayers $157.2 million compared to utilities' originally requested rates. Other PSC functions for Wyoming ratepayers include safety inspections, customer complaints, rulemaking, investigations, and those types of cases. total annual, I'll now draw your attention on page 2 to that forecast of gross interstate revenue. Their total annual budget for fiscal year 2022 is $5,137,502, is funded by this utility assessment. The gross interstate retail revenues are assessed up to 3 mills under the current law to fund the budget. The assessment cap was statutorily set at 3 mills in 1973. Based on current projections, the PSC would need a uniform assessment of 3.45 mills, which under the tiers in 30 equates to 3.6 mills for tier 2. Tier 1 is capped at 3 mills. 30 does not change the PSC's budget, but allows the utility assessment to fund the previously approved 22 budget. 30 increases the maximum potential funding produced by the utility assessment to cover the approximately 670,000 to 772,000 projected by the PSC's fiscal year 22 funding shortfall forecast under the current law, the 3 mil cap. The projected shortfall is due to the combined effects of COVID-19 pandemic, decreasing telecommunication voice revenues, and other pressures on the Wyoming economy. I'd now draw your attention to, we'll quickly here go to the bill. The uniform assessment is set annually and is a mechanism that funds the PSC budget and is currently capped. And the assessment rate is annually set in July based on the PSC's annual budget, federal grants, and utilities gross interstate retail revenue from the previous calendar year. The utility assessment level is set to fund only the budget approved by the Wyoming legislature. So let's turn to page 3 on the bill. And if you go down to line 15, I'll start there. However, the assessment rate against the persons for any 1 year shall not exceed 3 mils, the 3 1,000s, that's cleanup, of the gross Wyoming intrastate retail revenues for the persons. And now we're adding and changing this, adding to this, unless the assessment of 3 1,000s, 3 mils is insufficient to produce the amount to be collected. If the amount to be collected exceeds the amount produced by the application of the percentage factor to the gross Wyoming interstate retail revenue of the person, an additional assessment to produce the amount to be collected, but not to exceed, as now that you've provided for the amendment, 1 1,000th, 1 mil, shall be made against those persons defined as public utilities in state statute as defined there, but not cooperative utilities. And from your approval of the amendment, eligible, after utilities, we cross out exempt and insert eligible for exemption and choose to opt out from retail rate regulation. And finally, Mr. Chairman, I would just, in closing, those are succinctly the changes. And I would like to point out that the workload is increasing in complexity projected, with the projected power plant closures, wind, solar generation, and transmission construction issues, grid reliability, and regional coordination. And also, Mr. Chairman, implementation of legislative initiatives, which I totally support what we've done. Senate File 159, which is new opportunities for Wyoming coal-fired generation. Senate File 21, coal-fired electric generation facilities. And House Bill 200, which I really supported, reliable and dispatchable low carbon energy standards. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll stand for questions with the good help of our committee.
Okay, committee members and Representative Baker, I'm gonna take some questions and then I'll make sure and get your amendment in. So with this, just general questions on the bill, and Representative Baker, if you have some, go ahead.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I'll be withdrawing that amendment and presenting it on second or third reading. But I just wanted to add a little bit to the discussion in favor and speaking in favor of the bill in anticipation of future amendments. The testimony that we had in committee was that this commission probably needs an increase to the 3.5 mils to be able to fund their next biennial budget. So the 4 mils really does give them the latitude and really does give them the flexibility to create their budget. But what I want to point out briefly is in the past, how close they've come up to that 3 mil level. In 2009, they were at 2.99. In 2018, they were at 2.89. And in 2020, they're at 2.96. So there is a need to increase their ability to increase their budget. And I think that in future conversations, I look forward to it because we have added to this agency's duties. And I think that we can continue to add to their duties through things like blockchain tariffs, fighting for our coal and doing some of that in the future. I think that those discussions will come on this bill. And so in favor of the bill, Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Representative Heiner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the opportunity to ask some questions about this bill. If my math is serving me correctly, it looks like we're seeking an increase of 33% mill levy, which just rough calculations, if they went all the way up to 4 mil, that's an additional $1.5 million. So I know their budget has been vetted through our appropriation committee, and I respect their detail level of detail which they utilize to go over the various budgets. But I would appreciate some clarity on what this organization has done to become more transparent and efficient with the current scenario we have in the state budget. I know a lot of other departments have had to cut. They've had to make improvements in the way they do business. And I hope that this organization that we're talking about here in this bill has had to do the same, because they're asking for quite a bit more money, authority for the future. And we need to understand that a little bit better. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And to the good presenters of the bill or committee members, there's just some questions I have. We understand, as I look at the language of the bill, and as we make that request to increase their mill capacity, we would kind of understand that on commodity prices and in various shortfalls that impact public utilities or thereabout. But one of the points that's brought up in the paper is a lot of this is related to COVID issues. And so what I'm wondering is what examples was presented to the committee that revealed how COVID was impacting this, and if you could share those with me, then I'm wondering if those would be considered kind of a one-time impact on their budget that then could be, would these mills then be reduced as that goes down? Can you So if you could kind of help me, I hope that makes some sense. I'm trying to get a tie there from COVID to the impact on their budget.
Okay, Representative Sweeney, would you like to tackle those last two questions right now? Might be helpful.
I would, and I think Chairman Zwanitzer and Harshman will hopefully back me up here. On the increase, it's up to, and they really don't have an excess budget. They have done a lot of changes, become more transparent, but I would also respectfully say that we, the legislature, have added to their workload within the last year and a half to 2 years with the increasing complexity, and one of the major rate cases added to that. I don't know if I totally answered that, but to the comment about the pandemic, I think where they're coming from to that point in my mind was the reduction in the amount of revenue that you see on that chart. And those are projections from the utility companies on the reduction of revenue because of using less energy, is where that translates from. And so that's part of the piece. And then, so that's where I would leave that. And respectfully, if Chairman Zwanitzer or Chairman Harshman had anything to add to those two comments before we take my mind, thank you, Mr. Chairman, doesn't go backwards very, very far. So I appreciate you stopping at that point. So.
Okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and go with Chairman Zwanitzer, and then Representative Stith, you'll be next, okay?
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. To answer the good Vice Chairman of Appropriations question, my honest answer is there was no testimony nor anything to my knowledge COVID related with the agency. So this was discussed last February before COVID was apparent, that they had gotten right to the cusp, and in some cases had exceeded the cusp for several months over the past several bienniums of staying within that 3 mil level range. And so it was on our interim agenda before COVID happened. Perhaps there was, employees coming down or quarantining or any other number of things, but I was surprised to see that on the information sheet. From my knowledge, nothing related to COVID impacted their agency. Where the real impacts are happening is actually twofold. One is this legislature is continually increasing through bills we have brought their overview and their involvement in many areas, primarily related to coal-powered electricity. As you know, we're on a grid with 7 other Western states who all have varying beliefs and policies related to coal-fired electricity. And so working in that complex marketplace, the workload increases. At the same time, our revenues were, historically we've had, are decreasing. A main reason is deregulation. Telecom, especially in the past 4 years, we have deregulated telecom in zones 1 and 2, and we probably have the Telecom Act coming up next year, and we may, don't put this in the press, but may deregulate all of telecom, which would mean those revenues no longer come in. The great thing about this bill is instead of upping the mill levy across all utilities, the major drivers of the workload are gas, electric, and pipelines. And so you'll see in the bill, we're only increasing the threshold assessment on those 3 segments, not on water, not on telecom. And again, it's not automatic. It's only should they need to go up there. So we're not just jumping the mill levy to 5. It's if they have to go above 3, they have the power to do that. They're still subject to appropriations, to oversight, to appropriations agreeing with their budget. But because these are all special revenue funds, not general funds, they assess the companies And then as part of the rate making process, that rate goes on to your bills. It's a special revenue fund, but appropriation still controls the size of their agency and ensures the workload is appropriate to the funding coming in. Thank you.
Representative Stiff, do you still wish to speak?
Mr. Chairman, my questions were answered. Thank you.
Okay, Representative, excuse me, Madam Minority Floor Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd just like to kind of quickly answer some of the questions of the new representative from District 18. I served on that joint revenue committee where the bill was originally heard, and just two of your questions. One was the proportion of the potential increase. And honestly, as new folks, you'll see this regularly. We don't index our fees in our statutes almost anywhere. And so honestly, often when an agency comes to us, you will see a pretty big jump because we haven't raised that fee in sometimes a dozen years. And that's exactly what we're looking at here. The other question that you asked was about transparency and efficiency. And I'd like to suggest that in fact, some of the reason that we see the increase in cases is exactly because of that, especially with the issues with the consumer advocate within the PSC. It's because we are more transparent. It's because what we're doing in this body is out in the public, and that people have legitimate complaints. They bring them to the PSC, and the PSC must adjudicate them. This is the way that it happens. So I would say that this is honestly of our doing, and we should be pretty happy about it. Not that there are complaints, but that we have the mechanism for ratepayers to have their complaints heard. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Representative Heiner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sometimes by the nature of my questions, I reveal my ignorance, and I apologize for that. But I have one more question. As we see the electricity generation transitioning away from coal, and I suspect that's why the drop in revenue, gross utility revenues projected in the next biennium, is there, we see a lot of wind and solar coming into the state. Are they paying their fair share of this mill levy? Is that captured somewhere that they are picking up some of that weight? Thank you.
Representative Larson Dan.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I was on revenue last session, and we actually discussed this during the COVID in May. And so there was reference to COVID, maybe making that the income or revenue wouldn't be as high. There was quite a bit of reference of about other states' employees in this type of agency. And so it worries me that they're leading toward adding employees. So I'm not real in favor of this. I guess one question I'd have is, more than likely, well, I would guess this is going to be passed on to the consumer. And also this all has to deal with projected revenues. Who knows? I'm against it.
Okay. Representative Wilson. Representative Wilson, I can't hear you. Is it just me?
Sorry, I had my, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, sorry, I had my mic turned up. I can understand the revenue downturn with COVID just because of the mill rate and the downturn in the various energy valuations and whatnot that we've seen across the state. I guess what I just want to maybe even someone from appropriations might answer this. You know, and I understand that we're maybe asking them to do more, but in sort of a quick zoom through the budget section, I don't see a supplemental budget request where it looks like we've maybe tried to help them consider how to trim their budget a bit. So looking at the biennial budget for this agency, you know, I see space rental of close to $600,000 a biennium. So that's like $24,000 a month, I think. host 30 people and the dues and stuff. I mean, I'm not, I'm not going to try to pick down through line items in the budget on the floor, but could we maybe hear the discussion on what kind of attempts there have been to maybe tighten up their budget a little bit?
Okay, Representative Ayer, and then we'll go to Chairman Harshman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I worked in the utility industry for more of my career, so I probably ought to weigh in on this issue. For part of way back in the old days, the rural electrics were rate regulated. And when I was in that position of being under their purview for rate regulation, I was not always, it was somewhat an adversarial position, and they did their job very well. And I know that they continue to do that. Much has been talked about regarding the bills that we've passed recently that require them to spend more time, get more involved in some issues that we've covered in our the bills that were mentioned by the representative who introduced the bill. But I would like to kind of piggyback on what the good chairman of corporations said in regard to their added workload. And one of our major utilities has been going through and is, I think, still in the process of going through what is called a multi-state protocol. And we have been very well represented as a state by the OCA in that process. And I know that's taken a lot of time and will continue to. And as we, in kind of a partial answer to one of the previous questions, the wind and solar folk, as we transition away from that, this is based on retail sales. So if there's not a retail sale of that energy, it does not become subject to this tax. And so that's going to be another hit to their revenue going forward. So I think this is very much warranted. I speak in favor of the bill. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Chairman, just a couple points. I think, we as the legislature set their budget. They don't set their budget. We set their number of employees, and we really set their mission. And, we have capitalism except for some utilities. We've discovered over time that we have to have some monopolies to most efficiently do that. But this isn't a monopoly that we're going to bust up. We're going to regulate it. And so they have a real mission to save the consumer money. And you can read it in there. They've saved over 150 million in ratepayer rates. Wyoming's different in who actually pays the bills. Most states have more residents, more residential users than we do. Ours is reverse, like everything industry pays more here. But they don't raise. Then the second point is we set the budget, but they don't raise more than they need. And let's say that the Department of Revenue said you need 2.96 mils. And it came back the next year and they have 300,000 extra. Well, they're going to apply that to their next year's budget. They don't have a little slush fund, a little LSRA in their agency. And so every dollar that's collected out of this goes right back in to rate regulation. So I think it's vitally important. It'll all be scrutinized by us, the legislature. And if it's not needed, it won't be used. But the COVID impacts really because of the drop in activity in our energy industry, the lack of use of power. And we're all using these things. I gave up my landline years ago. And that used to be a substantial source of revenue for them. It's just not there anymore. And, and there's so much to this and how we, with the rural nature and how we provide all these services, you got power poles going out to ranch houses miles away from anyone else. And that's all paid for by us in a group that works through this regulation. So again, we're going to be the oversight and we'll watch this. And if it's needed, they're not going to come to a screeching halt. And then finally, I'd say to trim up their budget, their employees all took furloughs. It's my understanding. They took pay cuts throughout this thing. trying to do their part while they do the work for the citizens of Wyoming. So appreciate the great debate and would really appreciate your support and move this forward. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Washington.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a quick question. Did any CARES Act money flow into the PSCC?
Chairman Swansea, can you answer that real quick?
I cannot, Mr. Chairman, at this time. I do not believe so, but I will double check and report back.
Okay, thank you.
And let's go Representative Fortner.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I believe the Economic Times this is not the time to start increasing meals, which equates to taxes, you know, and I'm not for that. Like our other good representatives talked about, it's going to cost jobs. If you're furloughed, that means you opted to keep your job by doing without. I don't think we need to put employees in that position. Thank you very much.
Representative Baker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to add a couple things. I do believe that wind is captured in this because of the two-tier approach in the bill, but maybe Chairman Zwaniter can correct me on that. But as far as their budget, this discussion I think needs to go on, but I just want to give a quick analogy. The size of the pie has shrunk. So this agency, they base their budget off of the size of the pie. So if the pie is shrinking, continually shrinking, then obviously those individuals who are still part of the pie are going to be paying more. So what we're trying to do, we can do this in a couple ways. I mean, I think the approach, as you can see in some of the maybe upcoming amendments of second and third reading, we can increase the size of the pie. We can create more load for our state through this blockchain, through some other incentives. I think we can really do it. So I think this is maybe a stopgap approach, and maybe the amendment that I'm bringing in second amendment, it might be something that people are more amenable to, because it really does set it at 3.5 mils. So again, Mr. Chairman, on and in support of the bill.
Representative Sway.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to back up on a couple of points on adding new employees. My understanding, that's not what this is about at all, because the last time they added employees was 2013, and that has not been part of the conversation that they've had with us. On I'm being more efficient in the budget trimming. I think Chairman of Revenue went over that. On the wind, that's it is included, but it gets highly complex in my mind as to exactly how that works as far as the intrastate. But it is included, and I think that takes us up to date on my notes.
Representative Jennings.
Mr. Chairman, so I was one of the no 2 votes on this. And I think there's just a couple of things that I just feel compelled to put out there. The optics of this are bad. We're cutting other agencies quite severely. And while these people have done some furloughs and things like that, I get that, and I'm sorry that we have to do that. But we're going back to the ratepayers. We're taxing them so that they can meet a budget that they set that they thought was going to be there. Well, I'm sure the other agencies thought that too. Point number 2 is that some of these power plants, and one of the concerns that I had at a small level, but it's there. If retail sales continue to fall below a certain level, then those producers can actually get out of the regulation. And so in a way, we may actually be incentivizing even less production. And so, third, again, we're going back to the people who in the middle of this pandemic have suffered. And now we're asking them to kick in more because the pie has shrunk. And so I'm opposed to that notion. I hate to see us reach into the consumers or to our constituency and say, hey, just pay more each time we run into a problem there. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Chairman Robinson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess I would say I don't think 4 to 8 cents on your electric bill every month is going to make or break anyone's bank account. But 2 answers to questions. 1, no CARES money at all went to the PSC. I got that confirmed. They received no CARES Act. But especially for new members, I really need to emphasize to you how important the Public Service Commission is. In other states, these are elected positions. When we talk about economic development or any type of growth in Wyoming, the #1 economic development driver, and I think every state, is power, right? It's the cost of power. So of all the electricity produced in Wyoming, 85% of that is shipped out of state. It's not even used here. The largest, most known names you can think of get their power from Wyoming. Even our residents, through this process of the Public Service Commission, the goal is to keep rates as low as possible. The lower your power bill, especially in electricity or pipelines and gas, the more economic development you can do, right? The more people you can hire. If your fixed costs are lower, you can hire more people, you can be more productive. More companies come here because we have a lower sense of power. That's why blockchain and cryptocurrency we're trying to attract, because we believe we can produce power at a cheaper level. So when you really get into electric utilities and the grids, it is a competition more than anyone realizes to go where the cheapest power is available. And Wyoming is trying like heck to keep our electricity rates as low as possible. That's what the Public Service Commission does. So if they pass on 5 cents every month to your electric bill to save you $40 a month on your electric bill, I think it's worth it. The governor had to spend, an extra couple $100,000 this year for more expertise to come into the Public Service Commission as a private contract to help them out on these rate-making cases. And as many of you probably know, we just lost our chief public service commissioner. She moved on, and our other 2 commissioners are both in their 2nd year. So we have some immense issues before us. And to the good chairman of Labor Health, we really haven't looked at decreasing their number of employees the past 4 years, because every year this legislature has piled more and more and more onto them and asked them to do more with less. And so they're finally coming and saying, hey, we're at the breaking point. Can you help us out here? And I think that's why we're here before you today.
We'll continue to explore the angle of this particular bill. Representative Henderson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just want to build on the previous comments. If you look at the number of staff, I don't think there's any question this staff is working hard for everybody in Wyoming. And I don't think it's just about the rate. I think it's about the value added for the dollars that are, expended through this very important agency. As was mentioned, you have 2 out of 3 commissioners now. These staff people also have personal lives, and they have given just as everyone has during the hard months behind us and the ones to come. I don't think this is a one-off. I think it's going to go on. So I think if you look at this from the standpoint of capacity and being able to have a little bit of room, if you will, in that mill, so that as they get cases, and some of these cases that they put on the docket, they're very complex, as was mentioned to one power company. But the more complex the case, the more that they have to look at it and make sure that it's done right for the people of Wyoming. So I think this bill is a good bill and headed in the right direction. I mean, we just talked about a mill increase or having some additional support for taking care of non-human elements, the weeds and so forth. Now, this is actually directed at taking care of people. And, we all have the choice of turning the switch off to conserve the electricity. But I think this is a very important bill, and I would urge your support. Thank you.
Representative Janet.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the handout that I believe we received in revenue showed that the approximate cost would be about 50 cents for every $100 in your rate. So I don't know if the 4 cents or 3 cents or whatever, that's what the handout was that we were told was the minimum of 50 cents for every $100.
Representative Ayers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just two quick points. Wind is only captured in this assessment to the extent that it is consumed by retail customers in our state. And most of our wind energy is going to be exported, so it won't be captured. And then one final point, I'd like the body to remember this 3 mil cap was set in 1973. That's 47 years ago, without any rate in that assessment ratio. And so I think in that length of time, 1 mil increase is certainly reasonable. Thank you.
Representative Oscar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would just like to relate that I get that what I've read is that Wyoming has the lowest rates, or at least in the lowest 3 rates for electrical for our electrical generation in the country. So I would just say that the PSC is doing a pretty good job. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Okay, I turned my head and 2 more people appeared. Okay, I having a difficult time understanding what we haven't fleshed out, but Representative Hallinan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The 1 mil equals 10 cents on a $100 electric bill. And that is the amount that we'd be paid. That's the amount that we have to pay to support the Public Service Commission. I think it's a dime that's well worth spent. So I'm all for this bill. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Chairman Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to clarify that I'm not questioning the hard work of the staff, and from the material provided, it looks like they are probably incredibly efficient as compared to other states. I just figured I'd be a little bit helpful. I actually managed to pull up some advertising material for the place where they're leasing their office space and found out square footage and that sort of thing. And I see that they're renting about 600 square feet per employee. They just might want to consider, seeing as we moved some of our state folks into the Hirschler building and whatnot, that as tight times continue, they might want to look at their lease next time it's up. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Sweeney.
Thank you. Let's see if we can bring this home. To the point of the Chairman of Labor, I would just add on to that includes a pretty good size hearing room, because it has to basically be set up technology wise for their hearings. And just to further clarify, it is 10 cents per $100 on your utility bill. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'd call for the question.
Okay, Representative Baker, we need to officially take care of your amendment. If you'd like to officially withdraw that, that would be wonderful.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would withdraw Committee of the Whole Amendment number 1 to House Bill number 30.
Okay, thank you. That is withdrawn. Okay, question being called. All those in favor of Chairman Harshman's motion that when the Committee of the Whole rises reported, do so with a recommendation that House Bill 30 do pass. Please raise your hand. Okay, those opposed, On the opposed, please keep those up for a minute for me. Okay, House Bill 30 is passed committee of the whole. Okay, Mr. Majority Floor Leader, where are we at?
Mr. Chairman, I'm reluctant to do so, but I think we'll do one more bill if we can try to knock it out in about 20 minutes. So, body, let's try to get one more bill out. Thank you.
Okay, the next bill for our consideration is House Bill 18. The reading clerk will read the bill.
House Bill 18, sponsored by Transportation, Highways, and Military Affairs, Military Training Memorials, an act relating to honoring military members. This bill was referred to Committee Number 8, which returned a recommendation that it do pass with the following amendments. Ayes, Representatives Baker, Brown, Burkhart, Burt, Henderson, McGuire, Obermuller, O'Hearn, Stivart. Signed, Representative Burkhart, Chairman. It was re-referred to Committee Number 2, which returned a committee recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Representatives Kinner, Larson Lloyd, Nicholas, Stith, Walters. No, Schwartz, Simpson. Signed, Representative Nicholas, Chairman.
You've heard the reading of the bill. What is your pleasure, Chairman Burkhart?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move that when the committee of the whole rises to report it, do so with a recommendation that House Bill number 18 do pass, and I further move the adoption of the standing committee amendments. And I turn the explanation of the bill and the standing committee amendments over to the good representative from District 35.
Okay, Representative McGuire.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the House. I bring to you House Bill number 18 and ask for your favorable consideration. At approximately 4:33 this afternoon, I emailed out a one-page handout. We don't use exhibits on the floor, but we can send handouts, and I would ask you to take a quick look at it. It should be on your email. It came from Representative Joe McGuire. With regard to the standing committee amendment that improves the bill, it removes the term location. It has a grammatical correction for placed. It changes the optional match to a one-to-one and adds a memorandum of understanding to ensure that any monument or sign that is erected shall be maintained in the future. So I'll cover those amendments in the bill, and I would ask at this time for, or I would move the standing committee amendment number 1 and ask for your favorable consideration.
So members, any discussion on standing committee amendment number 1? Seeing no discussion, all those in favor of standing committee amendment number 1, please raise your hand. Okay, those opposed, please raise your hand. Just, please keep those up so I see them. Okay, standing committee amendment number 1 has been adopted. We're back on the bill. Representative McGuire.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The purpose of the bill is to create a structure by which nonprofit or veterans groups or charitable organizations may first identify a potential location to erect a memorial to explain and memorialize fatal accidents that occurred in the state of Wyoming while our military service members were training for overseas wars. Second, to apply for that location and to, or design and approve, or excuse me, to apply for a location and ask for design approval for a memorial, first from the Wyoming Department of Transportation, they're named in the bill, and also to apply for and hopefully receive design approval from the Adjutant General of the Wyoming National Guard. Finally, if WYDOT has surplus previously appropriated funds, the charitable organization may ask for a 1-to-1 financial match not to exceed the amount of $20,000. That request is at the discretion of WYDOT. And as we heard in committee right now, there are no surplus funds. So as of right now, there would be no financial or no fiscal impact, and there would be no match. Also, I would add to that that WYDOT is not a general fund agency, and the funds would be unused federal grant funds or other funds that might
be returned to WYDOT. So right now, any memorials that might be erected would be purely at the expense of the charitable organization. If you look at the handout, you'll see a picture of the type of monument that is contemplated. It will look something like the current Wyoming wildlife signs that you see at rest stops. The first location that has been proposed is the Shirley Basin Rest Area. And if you look at the sign in the handout, approximately 10 miles behind that sign is the location of the wreck of what's called the Murchison B-24. Now, that was a wreck that was lost to history until one of the members of the board of the Wyoming Friends of the, the Friends of the Wyoming Veterans Museum went out and rediscovered it. And the story of that, very briefly, is that that crew, along with 7 other aircraft, took off on January 1st, 1945, just as it was getting dark from the Casper Army Air Base. It was a training mission to Ainsworth, Nebraska, with a return to the Casper Army Air Base. They were projected to return at about 10 o'clock at night. 7 of the aircraft turned back because of inclement weather, but the Murchison crew pressed on. Unfortunately, they became disoriented and they weren't sure where they were. So as they started to let down, trying to find their way back to Casper, they encountered clouds and snow, and of course the pitch dark. In the 1940s on Shirley Basin, there were no lights out there. And so as they let down, they crashed. And unfortunately, not everyone was killed instantly in the crash. There were several survivors. And those survivors, the crash site was not found for approximately 3 days. So the people who did survive passed away either from their injuries or exposure before the crash site was found. So those are the types of stories that we feel need to be preserved and retold and brought back to the memory of people, because after all, we are a grateful nation. And if we're going to ask people to go out and make the ultimate sacrifice, they need to know that we're a grateful state and a grateful nation. And so that's what these groups are looking to do. Some of the other potential sites, there's another crash near Edgerton, and there is a small group in Edgerton that would like to participate in this. And then there's another crash site that's very close to the Soldiers and Sailors Home right outside of Buffalo. And we're hoping that we would get some of the veterans who are at the Soldiers and Sailors Home to participate in putting up a monument very close to that location. So that is the body of the bill, and I would stand for questions.
Representative Duncan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am speaking on and in support of this bill. At first read and first time I went through it, loved the concept, but I wasn't a fan of any sort of a fiscal or any sort of a increase or spending or anything at this moment. I'm a proud military family, multi-generations. And after the explanation that this is excess funds and this is beyond, nothing's going to be done currently, I'm a fan. I'm also a private donor. So I actually put my money where my mouth is and have contributed to different memorials like this myself. So I'm on in support.
Chairman Harshman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to just take a minute publicly thank the good representative from Casper for all of his work on these issues. And he's been really the champion for this. And it's certainly history that deserves to be remembered. And if you've never been to the Wyoming State Veterans Museum at the old Casper Army Air Base, you know, and it's really amazing. And I think a lot of that has been really championed and preserved by the good representative from the center of the state. So just appreciate his work. And this is just such a small, and it's just well done. So again, appreciate it. Thank you.
Chairman Flintner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And if the good bringer of the bill, if you already stated this, my apologies for missing it, but could you give us an idea what the cost is to erect one of those memorials? And then just perhaps over time, what the maintenance costs might be? Thank you.
Representative McGuire.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The type of monument that we're looking to put up, and that would be similar to the signs that you see that say Wyoming Wildlife, the approximate cost is $5,000. And with regard to the maintenance, ongoing maintenance, it's projected that they will last 20 years as presented. And then at that point, there would be a requirement to do some touch up and repaint. And again, there is a memorandum of understanding that would be required to be entered into between YDOT and whatever group is putting up that sign to make sure that into the future it is maintained and that YDOT doesn't get stuck with, so to speak, a pig in the poke. And the groups that are interested in doing this have, without any question, said that they would be happy to do the maintenance and make sure that those signs are maintained and kept in pristine condition.
Representative Burt.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I didn't support this bill coming out of committee and a number of different reasons. First one is the agency mentions, the director for that agency actually had mentioned come out that prior to this bill, any group or private individual that wanted to actually put up a memorial along the highways of our great state, the agency already required that group or that private individual to fully fund that memorial cost. So putting in a measure to now pay half of that or up to, it's a 50% match if the funds are available, now puts a financial burden back on the state that wasn't even there due to the agency's previous policy. The other thing I have an issue with is I already volunteer personally with a number of organizations. 3 of those are veterans organizations. And with that, every organization that I'm part of, there's always going to be a core group of individuals that are willing to put boots on the ground and make things happen. Usually it's anywhere between 3 to 6% of the full membership will actually get out there and do the physical work of either fundraising or, in this particular instance, it would be to actually help maintain the cleanup effort. So the other question that came up during their committee meeting is, what happens if the organization, if a private organization were to help fund the memorial, and then down the road, that particular group or organization disbands or is no longer available to do the maintenance? Who would then take care of that? Normal mowing of the yard or the side of the easement of it would fall under the YDOT because they're going to mow the grass anyway. But if the memorial or the site itself were to fall in disarray and that organization that was previously there is no longer around, then that cost would come back onto the state. Whatever that cost would be at that particular time. So I don't see a need for us to put something in place that the agency already had in place to take care of these. So for that, I am against this bill.
Representative Stivar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was also a no voting committee. What my good representative from the Land of the Green over there said is true. The last person training accident where a Wyoming guardsman was killed was, I think, was in 05, and he was up in the northern part on his way to Guernsey, rolled a 5-ton. There is already a plaque along the interstate for this. We don't need this bill. So I am a no vote.
Representative Simpson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm very supportive of this memorial project. I commend the good bringer of the bill. I think there's a lot of good things that can happen here, and it's always good for us to remember those that have lost their lives in service. You may have picked up when it came through appropriations, I actually voted no, however, to advance this bill. I'd like to explain for you why. My vote was on principle only. You recognize in the bill, it talks about the funding process. Only previously appropriated monies that are excess could be allowed to support this program with matching funds. I'm currently working with the director of YDOT to reopen the 10 rest stops that are currently closed and have been for last year and are currently scheduled to remain closed for this coming year. It troubles me that we're talking about excess funds when we currently have facilities that can and should be opened to the public. And so in my mind, I can't vote for a bill that could possibly take away funds that could be prioritized towards those rest areas.
Representative Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would just respond to some experiences I've had and it's regard to what happens if a volunteer group then doesn't take care of the sign, and that burden would fall back on the state. And the only burden that falls back on the state is when that sign or memorial becomes in disrepair, they jerk it out of the ground, and that's the end of it. So there's not any ongoing maintenance if the people committed to keeping it up fail in their duty. So I don't think that's a big impact to be worried about. I support the bill.
Representative Schwartz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am currently the third member in a row from Committee 2 to speak on this, and I too voted against it on re-referral. I fully support the intent of the bill. I commend the bringer of the bill. I'm a big believer in understanding our history and making it clear to everybody. But, you know, I've been on committee number 2 for some time now, and it tends to make you a little grouchy. And the last few months have been maybe even grouchier. And I know YDOT keeps telling us they are 3 years behind in their maintenance funds. And I recognize this is not a lot of money, but I cannot support the appropriation in this bill, so I will have to vote against reluctantly. Thank you.
Representative Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I haven't actually decided how I'm going to vote on the bill, but I would like to point out, just for staff listening in, because I do like to refer back to the bill digest and look at the committee votes. And the bill digest for this bill does indicate that it passed committee 9-0, although there were 2 members of the committee who just said that they voted against it. If we could just, obviously doesn't need to be fixed right now, but maybe someone could double check the record. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, Speaker Barlow, would you like to address that?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So members of the body, so that was brought to my attention by one of the members of that committee who voted no. And so I did check the record, and the record that the chief clerk received indicated all 9 aye votes. So we're going to have a discussion, of course, with our secretarial staff and the chairman to make sure that all of our chairmen are verifying the vote records after a committee meeting. So there's nothing we can do with it at this time, but I've now heard 2 members from that committee and that the vote was not reflected accurately in the vote record. So thank you very much. We will pursue not changing this vote or this record, but ensuring that we're accurate going forward. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Duncan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just need some clarification. The way the bill was presented and the way I'm reading it says the commission is, as available for expenditure, is authorized to be expended by the Department of Transportation during the fiscal year as it's available. Am I incorrect that we're not spending this now? We're only spending it if it's available, and if it's in excess, and that there's matching funds. So I'm really confused by all the extra talk about the appropriation. So if you could clarify for me, thank you.
Yeah, Representative Hallinan. Okay, there you go.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have the same concern that was just represented by the other representative. It seems to me that there is no money that the YDOT has available for this program. And without any money available, so we're only talking about private donation. So I think that should be a free vote for all of us to be in favor of this bill, because there's no money that we're going to be committing to it. Unless I'm wrong, and I'd be happy to be, if somebody would explain that to me if that's the case. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Chairman Flintner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sorry, I just had another question. I wondered if you took away the match, I mean, what would prevent a private organization from putting up a memorial presently? Is that doable? Thank you.
Representative Burt.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. To answer the previous question right there, according to the director of YDOT, any memorial that currently gets put up right now is paid for fully by the entity that wants to put that up. So if you lose a family member in a training accident and you choose to put up a memorial, YDOT would, they have the regulations on where you can and can't put a memorial, but they would require you or your family in order to pay for that fully the way it currently stands now. If you have an organization such a veterans group or any other particular group out there that wanted to put up a memorial for another group, YDOT would require that group to fully fund the memorial as it stands now. So that's how it's currently set up now, is you would have to contact YDOT in order to get approval for this. And again, this is coming from the director during the last committee meeting. So that's why I'm still a no vote on this one.
Representative Heiner.
Thank you, Chairman. As I've listened to the discussion here, I'm a little bit confused. It appears that the YDOT does not have the money to be able to do this, but there may be other entities that would wish to put up interpretive displays as a contribution. Do we need legislation to allow YDOT to work with these other entities to put up interpretive displays? And the reason I ask is, in my professional life, we have done this. We have, here in Southwest Wyoming, we have put up interpretive displays in collaboration with YDOT, and we didn't have to go through legislation to be able to do so. So I'm a little bit confused here why we need to have this legislation passed for them to be able to put up interpretive display or memorials such as this. Thank you.
Okay. Representative McGuire, do you want to try to bring us home, or you might be able to spur more debate on this?
I'll try to bring us home without any more debate. So yeah, the purpose of the bill is to create a structure so that not only can these organizations go and work with YDOT, but also there is an approval mechanism with the Adjutant General of the Military Department to make. And again, oftentimes it's easy for a director to say, oh yeah, anybody who wants to do this, they can just come forward. But if there's a structure, it just makes it so much easier. And this way we know that all parties are involved and that the message has been approved by the military department and that it's going to be a good, well-maintained monument. I think the answer was that, yeah, if the group disappears and the monument needs to be maintained, then YDOT, they can certainly take the sign out of the ground or call for volunteers, whatever will happen in the future. Finally, with regard to people being grouchy, I would recommend come to some of our events. And in fact, on July 26th, the Friends of the Wyoming Veterans Museum are going to have an event where we have invited the survivors' families to come out to the actual crash site. And one of the members who spoke earlier actually donated money to build the monument that we'll put right there at the actual crash site. And it should be a really wonderful event. We've got the CAP kids and we've got the ROTC kids coming out. And it's going to be one of those things that's going to make everybody feel good. And it might get you over that grouchiness that kind of comes with being in session for overly long. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I would call for the question.
Well, Representative Overmuller, I saw you waving. Did you have a question or not? I want to give you an opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it. I just wanted to add my support to this bill and the reason to do it, even though the funding doesn't appear it's there. This bill elevates the topic and awareness in the state. You know, as representatives of the people of Wyoming, this is a way for us to represent just the rank and file citizens of the state, to bring awareness to people that did pay the ultimate sacrifice in preparation for going to war. So this isn't really, so to just put it back on the veterans groups isn't the idea here. It's to elevate it to a level that is that the whole state is supporting. So I will be voting for this. Thank you, Mr.
Okay, any further discussion? Seeing none, question having been called. All those in favor of Chairman Burkhart's motion that when the committee of the whole rises report to do so, the recommendation of House Bill 18 do pass, please raise your hand. Okay, just give me a second here. Okay, those opposed? You know what? The chair's in doubt. I'm going to ask the chief clerk to call a roll call vote.
Andrew.
No.
Baker.
Aye.
Banks.
Aye.
Bear.
No.
Blackburn.
Aye.
Brown. Excused.
Excused.
Burkhart. Burkhart.
Aye.
Burt.
No.
Clausen.
Aye.
Clifford.
Aye.
Connolly.
No.
Crago.
Aye.
Duncan.
Aye.
Eklund.
Aye.
Air. Repeat, please.
Aye.
Flitner.
Aye.
Fortner.
No.
Gray.
Aye.
Greer.
Aye.
Hallinan.
Aye.
Haroldson.
No.
Harshman.
Aye.
Heiner.
No.
Henderson.
Aye.
Hunt.
Aye.
Jennings.
No.
Kenner.
Aye.
Knapp.
No.
Larson Lloyd.
Aye.
Larson Dan.
No.
McGuire.
Aye.
Martinez.
No.
Nyman.
No.
Newsom. Repeat, please.
Aye.
Nicholas.
Aye.
Oakley.
Aye.
Obermuller.
Aye.
O'Hearn.
Aye.
Olson.
Aye.
Ottman.
No.
Paxton.
Aye.
Provenza.
No.
Roscoe.
Aye.
Schwartz.
No.
Sherwood.
Aye.
Simpson.
No.
Summers.
Aye.
Stiff.
Aye.
Stivar.
No.
Sweeney.
Aye.
Walters.
Aye.
Washit.
Aye.
Western.
Excused.
Excused. Worf.
No.
Williams.
No.
Wilson.
No.
Winter,
Aye.
Yin,
No.
Swanitzer,
Aye.
Mr. Speaker.
Aye.
Closing vote. Are there any changes? Closing vote. The vote is closed. 37 aye, 21 no, 2 excused.
Okay, with your vote, House Bill 18 is passed committee of the whole. I apologize for the roll call. I just couldn't tell with all the hands. So, Mr. Majority Floor Leader.
Mr. Chairman, I move that the committee of the whole rise and report.
You've heard the motion. All those in favor, say aye or raise your hand. Those opposed? All right, the motion carries. Representative Yen.
Reading clerk will read the committee of the whole report.
Mr. Speaker, your committee of the whole, having had under consideration bills on general file, begs leave to report as follows. House Bill 35, do pass, amended. House Bill 4, do pass, amended. House Bill 25, do pass. House Bill 53, do pass, amended. House Bill 15, do pass. House Bill 30, do pass, amended. And House Bill 18, do pass, amended. Signed, Representative Greer, Chairman.
Mr. Speaker, I move the adoption of the committee of the whole report.
You've heard the motion. All those in favor, raise your hand. All those opposed, raise your hand. Motion carries. Congratulations, Chairman Greer. Thank you very much, members. So I think we're closing in our end of the business today. Chief Clerk, do we have any message from the Senate or anything we need to attend to?
No, sir.
All right, perfect. So I want to make a couple comments about tomorrow. Tomorrow, order of business will be a little different. We're going to do third reading and then second reading. So the bills that we just completed will be going to second reading, but we're going to do them after we do our third reading bills. And our Senate counterparts, the counterparts down the hall, excuse me, are going to do the same thing so that we can hopefully exchange our bills and notice committee meetings for Monday. So that the committee reports can be, bills can be engrossed. They can travel to opposite ends of the building, and then we can go to work on Monday morning with committee meetings and then on to the general file. As you will recognize, on Monday, we'll also have third reading on the bills that we did today on committee of the whole. So there'll be a little different order of business tomorrow, but it's trying to accommodate the most efficient work we can do. A couple other things, notes. On the day we convened, I read I paraphrased, read a memorial to our colleague, Representative Roy Edwards. And that memorial remains in the LSO office for anyone that would like to sign it. As you recall, it was signed by the president, excuse me, the presidents and the speakers, most of the 65th and 66th, but there are signature pages for any member who would like to sign it that is here today in the LSO office. It will stay there until March so that members, when we come in person, or the rest of us can get there. But I just want to remind folks that it is available. Secondarily, we lost a colleague just recently, Senator Hank Coe, a 28-year member of the Wyoming legislature. And there's a memorial there as well for him that you're welcome to sign. And tomorrow, Governor Gordon is going to order the flags flown at half staff, and I will read his memorial on behalf of our Senate colleagues. So those two matters, both of them are there for your signature, should you like. Mr. Majority Floor Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the House adjourn until 9 a.m. tomorrow, the 29th day of January, 2021.
Thank you, Mr. Majority Floor Leader. Any committee announcements? Committee announcements, Chairman? Just to remind Rules Committee and members that are interested in presenting to the Rules Committee, the Rules Committee will convene, let's make it 6:10 at 6:10 this evening. Give us all a few minutes to get wherever we want to get to. The Rules Committee will convene at 6:10 this evening, the House Rules Committee. And then the, excuse me, as a reminder, the Joint Rules Committee will meet upon noon adjournment tomorrow. We'll try to coordinate that very closely with the Senate so that we are meeting together as we need to. So with that, with no further business, all those in favor of the Majority Floor Leader's motion that the House adjourns until 9 a.m. January 29th for the fourth day of our session, please raise your hand. Those opposed? Thank you. The House is in adjournment until 9 a.m. the 29th of January.